A pickaxe shatters the rocky wall of a mine shaft hundreds of feet below the earth. It's 1871, in a place that will later be known as Columbia County, Pennsylvania. Men performing back-breaking labor, their hands and faces blackened with dirt, all working in pursuit of that immensely valuable rock, coal. It's the fuel for the booming Industrial Revolution, and much like how dragons were said to guard gold, this more modern treasure pointed to an even more terrifying monster. A monster that the SCP Foundation would someday come to know as SCP-1179. But these unfortunate and underpaid miners had no idea what they were about to discover. One of the men working there that day, Rob O'Dwyer, was hammering away at the wall in front of him when he heard something strange. Was that an echo behind the rocks? This could mean only one thing. The rocks in front of them were hollow. There had to be some kind of space hiding behind them. O'Dwyer struck again and again at the rocks in front of him until the barrier finally tumbled away. He and the other miners suddenly felt a gust of cool, ancient air from the vast and darkened cavern in front of them sweep through the mine. They felt like they were standing on the edge of something truly otherworldly. As they lifted their safety lamps high and crept carefully into the dark, it dawned on them that they were likely the first human beings to ever set foot here. But that didn't mean something non-human hadn't gotten there first. O'Dwyer's lamp soon found something in the dark. A huge figure curled into a crouching position, hiding its face. It was made from stone, like an enormous yet incredibly detailed statue of something almost human, but not quite. The petrified thing had two great horns on either side of its head, twisting into spirals like that of a huge ram. Word of the giant frozen monster hidden in the bottom of the mine soon made its way back to the foreman, and then back to the mine's owner, one Sean O'Malley. If it were anyone else, perhaps this news would have been taken to the press immediately, and the Foundation would have taken control of the situation just as quickly. But Mr. O'Malley was no ordinary mining magnate. He was a member of the Molly Maguires, an Irish-American secret society whose members were predominantly coal miners in Pennsylvania. Sean and the other Molly Maguires dubbed this anomaly the Sleeping Stone Giant and conspired to keep it a secret between them, as secret societies have a habit of doing. Though the Molly Maguires were disbanded less than a decade later, they were all sworn to secrecy on the Giant's resting place. Until, of course, a descendant of Sean O'Malley, his grandson Ian O'Malley, was chosen as a prospective agent of the SCP Foundation. The Foundation doesn't just let anyone join their ranks. They perform an extensive background check on all prospective agents, both to find out that they're capable of rising to the challenges of the job and also to detect any affiliation to enemy groups of interest. It was during this background check that O'Malley's subterranean family secret was discovered, and the land above the old mine shaft was bought up by a front company owned by the Foundation. The Sleeping Stone Giant was finally in capable hands, and in keeping with standard procedure, a research site was built above the Giant to gather data and keep an eye on things. At the time, the anomaly was considered extremely low risk. Its containment file read, SCP-1179 is apparently dormant, encased in the bedrock under research site. Apart from simple monitoring and standard research safety protocols, no additional containment is deemed necessary at this time. But of course, those simple containment procedures would soon need updating. In 1962, the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania had a trash problem. There were 8 illegal trash dumping sites across the town, and to combat this issue, the town council opened up a huge landfill in an abandoned mine shaft. You'd think this would be enough for the moderately sized town, but humans have a tendency to produce a lot of trash, and they soon filled up the new landfill too. In order to address the issue, the town decided to do a controlled burn of some of the garbage. It should have been simple enough, but those who lit this garbage fire didn't follow proper safety procedures and ended up accidentally igniting a seam of anthracite coal. This was like lighting the fuse to the world's largest stick of dynamite, and fire soon coursed through the long abandoned mine tunnels. When the fireball finally reached the Sleeping Stone Giant in his dark pit, the beast woke up. In that instant, an otherwise uneventful day quickly became a brutal bloodbath. Researchers walking through the base felt a monstrous rumbling beneath them. Heat sensors were burning up and seismic readings were off the scale. Something was climbing up towards them. Suddenly, An impossibly large sword speared its way out of the floor, killing everyone around it with an immense blast of heat. The newly awakened monster went on an underground rampage, almost completely destroying the research base and killing nearly everyone inside, before retreating into the honeycomb of coal mines and caverns in the area, igniting even more anthracite coal fires. The Foundation needed to step in before things really got out of control. At present, the Foundation couldn't properly administer standard area construction protocols for Keter-class SCPs, so they instead designated the mines, caverns, and surrounding countryside as Area 179, and dispatched mobile task forces to try and contain the beast rampaging in the Centralia mines. But much like the fire that started this whole mess, the beast proved much harder to control than initially imagined. All 5 of the expeditionary teams sent to apprehend the monster failed, and many team members were slaughtered in the process. From the terrifying accounts of the survivors, we have a vague idea of the nature of the beast below. No pictures of the creature exist, and exact descriptions on the beast can vary. Whether this is because the beast frequently shapeshifts or because it has some kind of cognito-hazardous effects on those who view it is unclear. The most frequently reported characteristics of the creature are its immense height and the extreme heat that its body exudes. Many report that the creature's body seemed to be formed of a mix of hardened lava, pure fire, and burning smoke. The beast measures over 30 meters from head to toe, with shoulders over 8 meters wide. It's commonly said to have 2 huge ram-like horns and a weathered, bearded face. The beast has been compared by some to the Norse mythological figure Surtur, the giant guarding the frontier of the Norse fire realm of Muspel. However, the actual age of the creature seems to predate these legends by a considerable margin. Dating of the stratum encasing SCP-1179 indicates it dates to the Mississippian subperiod of the Carboniferous period, approximately 359.2 to 318.1 million years ago. This age is consistent with the geological age of this region, so it may have literally come with the territory. Less common descriptions of the beast claim that it has huge wings, eyes made of hellfire, and fangs as long as a man's arm. Some say that the beast has neither horns nor fangs, and its face is encircled by flames which reach down into a long beard of fire. And like a certain creature known as the Balrog that Lord of the Rings fans will be very familiar with, this beast comes with weapons. In one hand, the beast wields a giant burning sword around 5 meters in length. In the other, it wields a huge multi-tailed whip made out of fire. It's incredibly proficient with these weapons too, and has a serious strategic advantage in its underground environment. Foundation researchers have determined that some of the wounds the beast gained from its first confrontation haven't fully healed, implying the beast could, in theory, be destroyed with enough firepower. However, given that the beast has killed almost everyone who faced it, and its mere presence can start almost uncontrollable fires, direct engagement would only be used as a last resort. Even the creature's breath can be extremely dangerous. Chemical analysis of air samples taken from SCP-1179's breath have shown exceptionally high concentrations of carbon monoxide and sulfur dioxide. The very presence of this creature creates a real and active danger to everyone around it. And the beast's presence was beginning to have seriously negative effects on the people up above. By the 1970s, the Foundation had given up on sending mobile task forces into the caverns, and instead began to focus on depopulating the town of Centralia to prevent further fatalities from the presence of SCP-1179. The subterranean activities of the creature were causing collapses in some areas, and noxious fumes were beginning to rise up from cracks in the ground. As the constant raging fires burned beneath the earth, they were causing everything above to slowly melt or bake. A Foundation geologist determined that the fires created by the beast would likely remain active for 250 years, and any attempts to put out the fires or contain the beast would ultimately be futile. This led to the formation of Project Tartarus, a concerted effort to cover up SCP-1179 and fully evacuate the citizens of Centralia. They pushed the narrative that the mine fires, while deadly, were merely the result of the failed garbage burning plan, and little by little the people of Centralia began to move away. By 1984, the United States government finally caved to secret lobbying from the Foundation, and allocated funds in excess of $42 million to relocate the remaining civilian residents from the area. Any legal complaints from Centralia residents were quietly crushed by the Foundation, and efforts to remove pretty much all residents from the area were successful. This allowed the Foundation to finally cast a wider net and administer Kettier-class containment protocols around the 2-kilometer underground zone where SCP-1179 resides. The Foundation has continued studies on the beast from below in the decades since, with some scientists even suggesting it could be used to produce geothermal energy, but whether or not that would actually be feasible remains unknown. For now, SCP-1179 seems content to stay within its zone, and hopefully it stays that way. But as we're forced to dig deeper and deeper for the remaining precious metals here on Earth, there's no telling what new dangers we might find lurking far below the ground. On November 27, 2011, a comet was spotted traveling towards Earth. This comet's existence was confirmed by Mount John University Observatory on December 1st of that year, and the next day the Minor Planet Center gave it a name, Comet C-2011-W3. Scientists continued to observe this comet's trajectory, which appeared to be nothing out of the ordinary. That is, until C-2011-W3 reached perihelion. C-2011-W3, like many objects entering the solar system, had been pulled into orbit around the Sun. And perihelion is a scientific term which refers to the point at which an object in orbit is the closest to the star it's orbiting. On December 13th, as C-2011-W3 approached perihelion, Solar Dynamics Observatory observed a fragment splitting off from the main body of the comet, a fragment that then began hurtling towards Earth. Despite the SCP Foundation's implementation of deterrence procedures, the comet stayed its course, and soon it became clear that areas near the predicted crash site would have to be evacuated. On December 21st, the comet reached the Earth, crashing into the Pacific Ocean 124 kilometers off the coast of the United States. This in itself wasn't unusual. On average, our planet is hit by 17 pieces of space debris a day, and much of it does land in the ocean. What was unusual, however, was that 3 days later, the creature that had been riding the piece of space debris reached land and revealed itself to the world. Starting on December 24, 2011, footage started cropping up all over the internet of an otherworldly creature. It appeared to be an enormous deer with mint green fur, a long neck, human face, and marbled black antlers ringed by floating ice crystals and metallic spheres. The SCP Foundation quickly mobilized in order to contain the beast, but it was immediately evident that it was impervious to attacks. What was worse, it had a devastating way of retaliating against aggressors. Fitting its cosmic origins, the deer possesses the godlike ability to instantly transmute matter through powerful energy beams. It can turn solids into liquids, gases into solids, and organic matter into metal instantaneously. The materials that result from these transmutations remain stable, despite outside factors that logically should destabilize them. For example, the deer can create shapes made of solid frozen hydrogen that remain solid even outside of the sub-zero temperatures that it normally requires to keep gases in their solid states. This transmutation ability is used consciously as a form of attack, and the beams occur in a variety of shapes around the creature. The most common are a vertical column measuring 5 to 7 meters in diameter and 60 to 80 meters in height, or a horizontal cone measuring between 100 and 150 meters in length and 10 to 30 meters in width at the furthest end. Although the deer rarely attacks without provocation, it will transmute matter indiscriminately, making no effort to exclude non-combatants from the range of the attack. Everything within the range of attack is transmuted. People hit with the beam will be transformed into hexagonal columns roughly 2.4 meters in height, known as SCP-2845-1. These columns have rubbery green skin and no organs outside of a brain, which makes up the entirety of the columns inside. Miraculously, they remain alive, as the brains of instances of SCP-2845-1 have been studied and are shown to be in a constant state of high activity. Analysis of brainwave patterns suggest a pattern of call and response, which implies a telepathic link between the different instances of SCP-2845-1. Given the devastating effects of SCP-2845's attacks, the SCP Foundation naturally had an extremely difficult time containing it, and they had to take drastic measures to do so. The Foundation enlisted the help of the Global Occult Coalition, as well as outside consultants who were brought in to try and draft a plan for containment of the beast. The ideal place for its containment was determined to be somewhere on the other side of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and through a campaign of artillery bombardment that lasted from December 26, 2011 to January 15, 2012, the SCP and GOC were able to drive SCP-2845 across the mountains to the location that would become known as Site-100. What sets Site-100 apart from other SCP containment sites is the complex system put in place in order to properly keep SCP-2845 in containment. The site consists of 9 concentric circular bands, designated Ring A through Ring I, with a gap located between Ring C and Ring D. 6 circular chambers are located at 0, 60, 120, 180, 240, and 300 degrees within each ring and gap. The chambers located at 0 degrees are aligned with geographic north. 2 additional circular chambers are located outside of Ring I, located at 120 and 240 degrees. The floor of each circular chamber is decorated with a hexagram, or 6-pointed star made of lead. The central chamber, containing SCP-2845 and 216 instances of SCP-2845-1, is to contain an atmosphere of 96.3% hydrogen, 3.25% helium, and 0.45% ammonia maintained at -110 degrees centigrade. Site-100 must be staffed at all times by a minimum of 30 trained individuals, or to be given unlimited access to untrained human subjects. The staff and subjects must perform a complex series of rituals at different points of the circle, acting on a cycle of 63 hours and 54 minutes. Each ritual lasts 39 minutes, and they must be performed every 10 hours. At the beginning of each new cycle, the schedule of rituals will be carried out in the next ring closest to the containment chamber, going from Ring I inwards until they reach Ring A. Each ritual requires 6 participants. Procedure 410 Constantine is performed at the 60-degree point on the circle. Containment specialists are presented with masks: joy, sadness, anger, apathy, fear, and foolishness, and must act out a farcical comedic play before playing a dice game with one another. Procedure 420 per Arnaldo is performed at the circle's 120-degree point. This ritual involves a performance by a band consisting of a flute, oboe, clarinet, French horn, timpani, and bass drum. It must be a live performance. Recordings have no effect. Procedure 430 Epimetheus, performed at the 180-degree point, involves exchanging small gifts with values not exceeding $4.28 USD. Each gift exchange is followed by the recitation of Ceremony Epimetheus A, and followed by scattering grain over the chamber floor. Procedure 440 Cassiel, performed at 240 degrees, involves the recitation of Ceremony Cassiel A, while participants bind their feet with wool and drink 500 milliliters of olive oil. They will then break apart a rock weighing at least 200 kilograms with hammers. Ceremony Cassiel B is recited throughout. While the previous procedures might sound weird, it's after that point that the containment rituals start to take a turn for the gruesome. Procedure 450 Cairo is performed at the 300-degree point. In this ritual, a D-Class personnel has a symbol drawn on their stomach with a platinum-based paint, a ring surrounding a dot, with an arrow pointed upwards at the 90-degree point. The D-Class is then presented with a blue cloak, crown, and scepter, before being restrained in a chair and castrated with a hand sickle as Ceremony Cairo A is recited. Finally, 460 Omphalos is performed at the 0-degree point, the very top of the circle. This ritual, the most gruesome of all, involves cooking and eating a 3-month-old infant. In case of containment breach, Site-100 is equipped with a nuclear warhead, just like all SCP containment sites, which will be detonated if containment ever fails. Because of the complexity of the procedures required to contain SCP-2845, some animosity started to develop between the Foundation personnel stationed at Site-100 and the outside contractors who had conceived the containment rituals. They had to go through these time-consuming, elaborate, sometimes horrific procedures over and over again, going around and around the circular maze that made up the site every 10 hours. and there was no way of being able to tell if the things they were doing had any effect on the creature in containment at all. On the 31st of January 2012, Site Director Dell finally approached one of the containment consultants and asked him why, exactly, they had to uphold all this pageantry. Surely there had to be some other, more streamlined way of keeping the creature in containment. The consultant denied this and explained their reasoning. "I find it sickening that after all the struggle to contain this creature, pencil-pushing bureaucrats are still seeking to cut corners where they cannot be afforded to be cut. The ritual will remain as it is and will not be changed in any way. Rituals do not work because of some underlying laws such as those that science operates on. Rituals work because they are rituals. They work because an arbitrary set of criteria has been met with exacting care. Belief that meeting these arbitrary criteria achieves a certain end assigns power to the ritual. The actions that were once meaningless now have been assigned meaning through their repetition and application. This is how one seals away a god. And this is a god. I know that the Foundation does not approve of using the term, but it is still the case. The stag is a god, and it is not a petty local god. It is not one of the mild gods of earth or some weaker spirit that is bound by the strength of man's belief. We have, for the time being, fooled it into thinking that we have overpowered it. It does not understand that we do so falsely. It is a god. For God's words have power. Ritual and belief hold greater power over a god than all the laws of science. So why are the containment procedures for SCP-2845 so dramatic and complex? The answer is simple, because the team believes the rituals work. As a cosmic deity, SCP-2845 doesn't follow any scientific laws as we understand them on Earth. But what it does understand is the power of rituals and belief. The only reason it hasn't escaped is that it responds to the beliefs of the Foundation personnel, and in turn it believes that it's being held in containment. The consultant goes on. It will not think to escape or even to change its strategy. The idea will not even pass through its mind. It cannot comprehend the concept. It does not think in the way we think. Truth be told, I would not say it thinks at all. This is an old god. It does not dabble in decisions. Decisions are for creatures who may act erratically, variably, or out of line. A god of this strength simply is. It is an absolute. It acts as a force. In building this ritual, we have shifted its being the slightest bit, and now it is locked into a pattern of behavior. It struggles against us, and we struggle against it. And we are locked together in eternal dance so long as the ritual remains intact. One last question remains, though, when it comes to SCP-2845. The rituals that are performed to keep it in place are far from random. They seem so specific that it feels impossible that the outside consultants could have come up with them out of the blue. What was their inspiration? Well, in his statement to Site Director Dell, he mentions listening to the songs of the converted. Remember how the instances of SCP-2845-1 were shown to not only be alive, but communicating with each other telepathically? They were able to communicate with the contractors as well, giving them the tools they needed to create the prison that would hold their god. If you were wondering how the converted feel about having been transformed into immobile green monoliths, the consultant had an answer for that question too. They are not suffering, but they are no longer human. They are changed utterly. And so the rituals continue in order to keep SCP-2845 contained. Perhaps one day a new technology will be found, or simpler procedures will be given. But until that day, we're all lucky that there are others who will subject themselves to horror day after day, hour after hour, for our behalf. It was 1965, and the Chicago PD was investigating a meatpacking plant reported to be the home of a devil-worshipping cult, complete with allegations of human sacrifice. There, the cops were met with heavy resistance. A firefight broke out between the police and the occult worshippers who flooded out of the plant's basement. The cops were pinned down and in trouble, but they had a secret weapon, heavily armed and decked out in sophisticated ballistic armor and covered in strange insignia. Mobile Task Force Epsilon 9, also known as the Fire Eaters, here to assist the cops on behalf of the SCP Foundation. As always with the Foundation, they had no interest in some mere human cultists. Those were a dime a dozen in the world of anomalous monsters. What the Foundation had taken an interest in was who or what these cultists were worshipping. It all begun a few weeks back. near Danforth Meatpacking, an abandoned meatpacking plant just outside of Chicago. No one had given the place a thought in decades, that is, until people started going missing. Rumors spread of people being snatched in the surrounding woods by figures dressed in robes. Mysterious voices and noises were said to be coming out from the cavernous belly of the plant. Some even reported seeing smoke rising out of the building. Thick, black, noxious smoke. Something was terribly wrong here. Something was anomalous. The Chicago Police Department Strike Force, in association with the fire eaters from the Foundation, mobilized at Danforth Meatpacking. While the police were initially reluctant to work with these mysterious figures, they turned out to be indispensable for the raid. There were 47 cultists holding out in the basement of the plant, many of them heavily armed and all of them hopped up on zealous devotion to their unknown master. All except one of the cultists fought to the death during a tense firefight with Chicago PD and the fire eaters. The single survivor was still heavily injured and was taken to a secure Foundation facility for emergency treatment and debriefing. Typically, the Foundation would need to perform extensive tests on the Danforth meatpacking plant to discover the source of the anomaly's activity. However, this time, it was a Chicago detective who asked the question that busted the case wide open. The hell's with the giant pig? And while it would turn out to be a whole lot more than that, there was indeed a giant iron furnace shaped like a pig in the center of the facility. Measuring 15 meters by 25 meters by 20 meters at its widest points, the thing was a behemoth. It had an internal furnace despite no apparent fuel source, and a 5-centimeter slot of unknown purpose on the side of the machine's immense rusted hide. Naturally, all the police officers involved in the raid had their memories wiped and restructured, and they were lucky, because they'd remain forever ignorant of the true horrors about to unfold in the confines of that godforsaken factory. As is standard procedure, the plant was isolated, and a Foundation research team, led by lead researcher Westrin, under the authority of Regional Director Caleb, was installed on the new provisional site to conduct tests. Other than everyone feeling somewhat uneasy around it, this new anomaly, dubbed SCP-4511, didn't seem to exhibit any strange activities save for its perpetually burning fire. But during the initial research period, a small white card suddenly popped out of the slot in SCP-4511's side. A researcher carefully approached and looked at the card. There was writing. It said, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied." Though nobody on the team had any idea what this meant. After going through a shootout with a considerable death toll to get to it, having a giant metal pig-shaped furnace spit out a cryptic card was strange. But at the secret medical facility where the surviving cultist was being held, things were about to get a whole lot stranger. As he lay in a bed suffering from his injuries, he pulled one of the medical staff close and uttered cryptic, dying words. "Give whatever it demands, or your suffering will be beyond measure." He expired seconds later, less than 72 hours after the raid. Back at the meatpacking plant, at the exact same time, another white card was produced by the machine, reading, "Current demand, the metal teeth that endlessly churn. Period. 1 week." Perhaps this entity was a little more intelligent than they thought. A number of researchers on the team, invigorated by this new development, were eager to press forward with experiments. Lead researcher Westrin, however, did not share their enthusiasm. Something about this entire situation felt like a grim omen to him. This entity had a plan far beyond their understanding, and on some deep animal level, he knew that helping this thing see its plans through would lead to disastrous results. On this first gut impulse, he denied the request for further experiments, but Regional Director Caleb had other ideas. Caleb overruled Westrin's command, and the experiments began shortly after. The entity, jokingly nicknamed the Swine God by researchers, had made its demand. The metal teeth that endlessly churn. But what could that mean? It wasn't long before the entity began to produce more cards, each with their own strange and esoteric demands. However, on some instinctual level, the researchers at the site understood the demands perfectly. The next card's demand was, "The metal of this suffocating prison." Upon receiving this demand, researchers collected scrap metal from around the new site and tossed them into the furnace beyond the swine god's jaws one by one. Inside, they heard the sound of metal crunching, Hours later, all the other metal in the site began to rapidly oxidize and rust, though SCP-4511 itself remained unaffected. The card that came after delivered another simple request. Oil to slicken my frozen joints. The researchers understood and procured 3 large barrels of oil and tossed them into the furnace. The entity let out a deep gurgle before shaking violently and expelling excess oil, rusted metal, and 2 domesticated pig femurs. It turns out that the swine god had an appetite for pigs, as the next card that rumbled out of the machine bore the request, 2 of my children, made in my image, made in flesh. In response, the researchers provided the entity with 2 adult pigs. Just like the previous requests, they too were tossed into the fiery depths of the giant pig's mouth, from which came the horrible sounds of pigs squealing, and then a low, guttural gurgling. Next, the request was, the hooks used to hang my children's corpses. To satisfy this request, the researchers provided 17 meat hooks. In response, 4511 spat out a metal sphere at an extremely high velocity, killing observing Foundation Agent McHenry. For reasons that weren't apparent at the time, rather than giving Agent McHenry a proper burial, his body was also fed into the hungry machine. Lead researcher Westron's concerns were mounting, but that didn't amount to much now. 4511 had developed a taste for flesh, and the researchers were all too eager to obey its command. On the swine god's order, it was fed a German shepherd. An hour later, the entity spat out some teeth, 6 of which came from a dog and 1 from a human. More than once, it released a card with a blunt request. A worker for the line. The researchers knew exactly what this meant. It required a human sacrifice. SCP-4511 was given 2 D-Class personnel. 1 was flung back out seconds later, crunched and burned to death, with several internal organs missing. The other had a more mysterious and altogether upsetting fate. The second D-Class was heard screaming in the belly of the furnace for roughly 2 hours. 34 minutes later, a strange liquid was excreted by the machine. When the liquid was tested, they found trace amounts of chemicals like pig urine and motor oil, but most disturbing of all, human genetic material that was identical to that of lead researcher Westron. It seemed that the swine god had finally taken an interest in him. After some final requests for large quantities of coal and even human children to fuel its fires, it made a request that sent the whole thing crashing down. The false foreman, delivered to my maw to prove your faith. Lead researcher Westron knew what this meant. They all did. The swine god was demanding him in sacrifice. Lead researcher Westron tried to shut down the entire project, but the swine god was faster than him. One of his own researchers shot Westron in the leg, as the others gathered round and forcibly restrained him. He tried to reason with his subordinates, but it didn't do him any good. The swine god had crawled into all their minds and corrupted them. They were his servants now, and Westron was doomed. Despite his protests, the servants forced him into the mouth of SCP-4511, and after a little over 4 minutes of screaming, Westron was devoured just like all the other sacrifices. Upon receiving news of the horrors unfolding in the Danforth meatpacking plant, Regional Director Caleb declared the security of the site compromised and sent in Mobile Task Force Epsilon 11, aka the Nine-Tailed Fox. The 4 elite MTF soldiers were given the simple instruction to figure out exactly what had happened and to eliminate any potentially compromised Foundation staff members who'd fallen under the swine god's power. When the team arrived, they realized just how far gone the whole place was. Almost everyone was dead, having been sacrificed to the machine, and the ones that were left were completely insane. They attacked the task force, shouting in their madness about how no matter what the Foundation does to them, it would be nothing compared to what it would do. It had them all under its rusty iron foot. The team was forced to fend off repeated attacks from the pig's devotees, and even found the powers of the swine god starting to affect their own minds. The beast was more powerful and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The trained Foundation researchers and guards had been transformed into the same cultists they'd fought to gain control of the building by the mind-bending power of the swine god. The MTF were forced to retreat and return with reinforcements to truly clean the place out. Once a slaughterhouse, always a slaughterhouse. At this point, Regional Director Caleb took personal responsibility over the casualties, since he'd been the one who signed off on the experiments in the first place. He gave up his Regional Director rank and deemed himself the new lead researcher on the 4511 case, now that he fully understood the scope and danger of the entity they were dealing with. He wanted to lead the charge in discovering more about the anomaly and hopefully someday negating its deadly effects. This may sound like a happy ending, in spite of all the violence, bloodshed, and human sacrifice that brought us here. But beware of the premature celebration. Despite investigation, the swine god retained no evidence of the objects, animals, and people it consumed and burned. Perhaps it burnt them down to their very atoms, if those even still existed. What we do know is that not long after lead researcher Caleb and his subordinates installed themselves into the facility, SCP-4511 produced one more little white card. It read, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied." And if we've learned anything today, it's that the swine god gets whatever it demands, a brutal truth that lead researcher Caleb is likely to understand much sooner than he thought. Sometimes the SCP Foundation needs to get creative with how they go about securing, containing, and protecting. Sadly, not everything can be solved with a mobile task force or by locking it away securely in a concrete chamber. Which brings us to SCP-2480, otherwise known by the nickname, an unfinished ritual. When initially looking through the file on SCP-2480, the reader will immediately notice a number of discrepancies throughout. Parts of the entry have been crossed out. They've been struck through, so they are still readable, not redacted completely for the purposes of secrecy like many of the details in other SCP files. First and foremost, SCP-2480 has been reclassified multiple times, first as safe, then changed to the infamous Keter class, but now it is listed as far more ominous. Presumed neutralized. It's disconcerting, because presumed definitely leaves a lot of questions. So what exactly is SCP-2480? SCP-2480 is an area of dimensional abnormality, apparently created when an occult ritual was interrupted in November of 1952. Hence the nickname of an unfinished ritual. The source of this anomaly is located in a heavily forested town somewhere near the coast of Massachusetts. Of course, this state has long been synonymous with many occult happenings, Massachusetts famously being home to a number of supposedly haunted houses and sites of supernatural activity, and SCP-2480 is no exception, seeming to fit both of those criteria. In order to keep an eye on SCP-2480, the Foundation has dispatched Mobile Task Force Epsilon 6, also codenamed the Village Idiots. These operatives are working undercover in the surrounding area and nearby town, keeping watch for any sightings of anomalous activity. Meanwhile, another team, MTF Psi-9 the Abyss Gazers, are stationed nearby in case any incidents should arise. These operatives have been authorized by the SCP Foundation to employ the use of lethal force on any and all anomalous manifestations they should encounter. Their directive is to destroy without prejudice. That sure sounds like a lot of effort to secure something classed as presumed neutralized. The anomaly itself is centered around an old Massachusetts house known as Bodfell Manor. The manor was once the home of a millionaire industrialist by the name of Cornelius P. Bodfell III, who died in 1952 at the age of 86. And yes, he died in the same year that the ritual that created SCP-2480 took place. But we're sure that's probably just a coincidence, right? Interestingly, during his life, Cornelius Bodfell apparently had something of a fascination with the occult. It was likely this interest that drew him to creating a supernatural cult known as Adedium's Wake. Little is known about this organization, and Adedium's Wake are not part of the SCP Foundation's groups of interest, the list of other anomalous groups that often rival the Foundation. Much like the anomaly itself, they're presumed neutralized. The Foundation conducted a full-scale investigation into Bodfell Manor and were able to unearth more information about the aforementioned cult. Fortunately, Cornelius Bodfell kept a series of meticulous and detailed journals, as well as photographs that give plenty of insight into the activities of Adedium's Wake. Unfortunately, a lot of what they got up to wasn't all that pleasant. But what did you expect from a group of cultists? Adidium's Wake would engage in all kinds of depraved behavior, some that's better left to the imagination. What we can say is they'd often perform ritualistic human sacrifice and indulge in cannibalism, and these are some of their less unpleasant crimes. On-site personnel also uncovered sermon notes in Bodfel's journals, detailing the cult's services and occult practices. They also found lists of the Adidium's Wake members, including local wealthy families and respected politicians, other industrialists like Cornelius Bodfel, and even priests and other religious figures. The Foundation had previously been aware of Adidium's Wake, but initially dismissed the group as little more than a decadent upper-class social club not worthy of a full investigation. Let's review, shall we? We have a dimensional anomaly in a Massachusetts manor, a cult obsessed with the supernatural, and some sort of ritual that occurred in November 1952. But was interrupted before its completion. All parts of the same bizarre and twisted puzzle, but there's still a piece yet to be uncovered. That missing piece? The Global Occult Coalition. Who would have expected the GOC to rear their ugly heads around here? Though it's worth mentioning that many of the GOC's member groups are occult in nature, so it probably shouldn't come much as a surprise that they were somehow involved in this case too. It goes without saying that the SCP Foundation shares a complicated relationship with this particular group of interest, each often disagreeing with the other's methods. Occasionally, the GOC and the SCP Foundation will put aside their differences and act as allies against large-scale threats like the Scarlet King, but any alliance between them is often uneasy and short-lived. In the case of SCP-2480, the Foundation were first alerted to the anomaly's existence when they decoded a GOC distress signal, tracing its source to Bodfel Manor. When the investigative team arrived, they found deceased bodies littered throughout the estate, 36 corpses in total. Each of these were confirmed to be Coalition operatives, and the rest were theorized to be dead members of Adidium's Wake. Almost all of the corpses found at Bodfel Manor displayed signs of anomalous causes of death. Some had imploded, some disintegrated, and others had their bodies twisted into fatal new shapes. At first glance, and given the GOC's mission to destroy the supernatural, it looked as if they had stormed in and interrupted the Adidium's Wake cult while they were right in the middle of performing a ritual. Things went awry. SCP-2480 was created, and caused everyone nearby to die horrifically. Surely that's the whole story, right? Well, not quite, as it turns out. While there were no surviving GOC operatives for the Foundation to interrogate, the investigative team were unable to uncover documents related to the operation in a nearby safe house used by the GOC. Much of the official documentation was destroyed in an attempted cover-up, but a torn remainder of a mission report was recovered in the safe house's fireplace. It was actually the Global Occult Coalition who had initiated the ritual, though its true purpose was lost. The Foundation had learned that the SCP-2480 area had been inadvertently created by the GOC and their heavy-handed approach to their mission. But why would an anti-occult organization attempt a supernatural ritual? Theories as to their intention seem to point to the penultimate piece of the puzzle: Sarkicism, a widespread religious cult that worships flesh and disease. The very existence of this religion is viewed as a threat of apocalyptic proportions by the SCP Foundation. Sarkicism was initially founded by the Grand Karcist Ion, but it has since split into a number of smaller subgroups over the millennia, and among those groups, Adidium's Wake. The GOC mission report fragment gathered by the Foundation describes the operative's target to be Grand Karcist Ion himself. He apparently cannot be directly perceived, so few actual descriptions of his form exist. It has been noted by some to be humanoid in appearance at least, wearing what looks to be vestments similar to a priest's, and carrying a staff. Ion is able to disappear and reappear at will, and possesses a plethora of reality-altering capabilities. The Sarkic founder is able to shift and reshape any organic material, as well as having the ability to bend the very fabric of reality around him. While he may hold a humanoid shape, this entity is certainly not human, at least not any longer. Functionally immortal, Grand Karcist Ion is noted to frequently exhibit signs of malignant narcissism and megalomania. So now the story shifts. The GOC was attempting to use Adidium's Wake to summon Ion in order for them to eradicate the leader of the Sarkic religion. The plan backfired though. SCP-2480 was summoned, and both the cult and coalition operatives were killed. End of story, right? Except there is one more twist in this tale of cults and secrets. And that twist came from the last place anyone would expect. It came from inside the SCP Foundation. After SCP-2480 was created by the ritual at Bodfell Manor, Site-13 was established in order to keep the anomalous area contained. You see, if the ritual was an atomic blast, then SCP-2480 was both the crater and the nuclear fallout from that blast. Except instead of causing radiation sickness, the entire area around Bodfell Manor became dimensionally unstable and prone to anomalous occurrences. Overseeing Site-13 was Director Simon Oswald, a Foundation bureaucrat. Simon had been selected for this duty thanks to his distinct lack of imagination, and because the anomalous area of SCP-2480 was thought to be inconsequential at the time. In 1988, Oswald failed to deliver his regular report on SCP-2480's activity. This was initially thought to be a simple error, except the Foundation couldn't get in contact with Site-13. Why? Because the unfinished ritual hadn't actually failed. It wasn't unfinished. The GOC had succeeded in summoning Grand Karcist Ion, and Simon Oswald had been the one to discover this. The founder of Sarkicism appeared to Oswald, who was converted and turned against his superiors at the SCP Foundation. Ion was able to exert his influence over the former bureaucrat, swaying him to change sides by showing Oswald a description in the Foundation's personnel dossier on him that referred to him as a mirthless dullard. Turning his back on the Foundation and pledging himself to Sarkicism, Simon Oswald was granted anomalous abilities by Grand Karcist Ion. Oswald was given the power to control an army of anomalous entities called Sarkites that he could summon through the area of SCP-2480. Grand Karcist Ion dubbed Simon with a new name, Karcist Karvas, and made him the leader of his new army. Their goal was to bring about the Sarkic religion's ideal, the dawn of a new age of flesh that would spell destruction for humanity. When the Foundation lost contact with Site-13, they dispatched two agents to investigate, Samuel Rowe and Sarah Valentine. Unaware of Oswald's conversion to Sarkicism and his new purpose as Karcist Karvas, both agents were captured by the Sarkite creatures within SCP-2480. The same monsters were also terrorizing the nearby town, replacing citizens and sometimes even kidnapping and devouring them. Another team was later sent in to survey the area, only to be killed or replaced as well, with only one survivor, Dr. Calixto Narvaez. Narvaez reported on the situation to the O5 Council, and in collaboration with the Global Occult Coalition, the Foundation launched an assault against Oswald. The joint task force of the two organizations were able to neutralize the Sarkites, reclaiming the area of SCP-2480 and capturing Simon Oswald. Without his control, the creatures became directionless, unable to so much as eat or defend themselves. Grand Karcist Ion's plan had been thwarted, and Oswald was taken back to an SCP Foundation site, though now under a new name, SCP-2480-1. However, during an operation at Containment Area 14, Oswald seemed to suffer no effects from anesthetic or surgical incision. Foundation researchers were horrified to learn that Oswald no longer possessed any internal organs, save for his brain, heart, and lungs. The rest of him was empty. Later, he was interrogated and began raving about Grand Karcist Ion so much that the doctor questioning Oswald attempted to attack him. Breaking free of his restraints, Simon Oswald amputated both of the doctor's arms before he was recontained by guards. Since then, the area of SCP-2480 has been mostly quiet, but it still remains under the Foundation's close watch, just in case any anomalous happenings start up again. But if you're planning a tour of the many haunted old houses of Massachusetts, we'd recommend maybe avoiding Bodfell Manor. Viruses. From influenza to the common cold, we've all had experiences with these nasty diseases. They're easy to catch, quickly transferring from one host to another through proximity or physical contact. This also means that viruses are easily spread, and if the number of infected grows beyond what is treatable, it can cripple the entire world's health infrastructure. Overrun hospitals, behavioral mandates, and constant death are all elements of a worldwide pandemic. It's no wonder why zombie outbreaks and lab-grown diseases are such common premises for horror movies and video games.
Diseases are downright scary, and it's most likely because the world has been overtaken by disease on multiple occasions that makes them so frightening. The bubonic plague, the great influenza pandemic, and even the COVID-19 pandemic are all events that have wiped out significant portions of humanity. And if left unchecked, a viral disease might be able to wipe out every last one of us. Sure, you can take measures to keep yourself safe, but who's to say a mutation isn't out of the question? A disease altering its own biology to overcome resistance and continue its spread could be a germaphobe's nightmare, and have serious consequences for the entire world. Of course, we're still talking about ordinary diseases, but what about when the virus is anything but normal? What if it falls under the umbrella that could be termed anomalous? Enter the SCP Foundation. For them, anomalous viruses are some of the hardest to secure, contain, and protect the world from. It's not hard to imagine why, either. Containing viruses often involves the spread of safety precautions and information, sometimes distributions of vaccines and medicine. Basically, to stop a virus, people need to first know what they're dealing with. When you're operating under the veil of secrecy that the Foundation has to maintain, your options for information dispersal become a lot more complicated. Of course, by nature of being anomalous, the diseases the Foundation has to deal with are a lot stranger and definitely more dangerous than just another strain of the flu. Perhaps you're already familiar with SCP-008, the infectious disease codenamed the zombie plague that shuts down a victim's body and decays it heavily. But the SCP Foundation's Russian database has a deadly virus of its own. SCP-1007-RU is also known as the Nietzsche virus. It's nicknamed after the famous German philosopher who coined the term "God is dead" and explored themes of nihilism, an ideology that delves into the meaninglessness of life, the universe, and humanity's existence. If that doesn't clue you in that this anomaly is horrifying, then just wait until we dive into the file itself. SCP-1007-RU is, given its viral and infectious nature, kept in a high-security containment chamber intended to seal the anomaly away from the world. The chamber is outfitted with a triple airlock system that prevents accidental leakage and unwanted access. Entry into SCP-1007-RU's containment chamber comes with its own set of special containment procedures. Researchers must outfit themselves in an insulated protective suit that allows no material from inside the chamber to make contact with their body. Once their work with SCP-1007-RU is finished, they must take a sterilizing shower to watch any potentially lingering harmful particles from their body. And if that's not enough, they're forced into a 6-hour quarantine, isolated from the rest of the Foundation until their superiors are absolutely sure that they don't exhibit signs of infection. If personnel are by chance contaminated after contact with SCP-1007-RU, the Foundation takes their best interests into account and immediately euthanizes them, followed by a cremation of their remains to make sure all biological material is destroyed entirely, as harmful infectious agents may still persist on skin tissue and inside the body long after death has occurred. Yes, the containment procedures for SCP-1007-RU is immediate termination of a valuable Foundation employee. Those don't grow on trees either, and the Foundation definitely does not resort to this option very often. But this only demonstrates the severe threat that SCP-1007-RU poses to the Foundation's integrity. Perhaps losing one employee is better than the innumerable deaths caused by a full-scale outbreak of the anomaly. The area surrounding SCP-1007-RU's containment chamber, located in a facility kept inside the larger Foundation grouping of Zone 07, is also kept free of contamination by a high-temperature sterilization process. As a final security measure to keep SCP-1007-RU's containment as safe as it can possibly be. Since SCP-1007-RU is transmitted like most contagious viral diseases, via airborne, physical, and blood contact, the Foundation has made sure their containment procedures are as safe and tightly designed as possible. Since anyone who comes into contact with the anomaly is a carrier of it, all of the precaution is understandably necessary. But what is SCP-1007-RU, aside from a deadly infectious disease? What makes it anomalous and separates it from an ordinary virus? SCP-1007-RU specifically involves a multi-step mutation of neurons. If you don't already know, neurons are cells that transmit and receive nerve impulses throughout our bodies. Neurons respond to stimuli, sensations like touch, sound, light, and information from other cells. They're an essential part of our bodies and a necessary component for cells to communicate with one another. But most importantly, neurons help us feel pain. When SCP-1007-RU infects a subject, it changes their neurons over time to allow them to feel an increased threshold of pain tolerance, meaning that the victim can feel a more intense amount of pain before succumbing to death or losing consciousness. That almost sounds beneficial, right? If everyone had an increased pain tolerance, things like minor cuts or falling off your chair would barely register as harmful. But SCP-1007-RU has a disadvantageous trade-off that comes with its multi-step nature. As the virus mutates and changes, it does so in steps. But before each stage of cell mutation occurs, the victim experiences enough pain to completely overwhelm their pain tolerance threshold. SCP-1007-RU's initial incubation period lasts 2 to 4 hours, after which the virus will make its way through the central nervous system and to the brain. The victim experiences severe pain in line with their ordinary pain threshold and promptly loses consciousness. After they regain consciousness, the true horrors of SCP-1007-RU commence, and the anomaly begins to mutate their neurons and alter their existing pain thresholds to accommodate more stimuli. SCP-1007-RU seems to have an indefinite number of stages. If the victim can handle the pain, the infection will persist, and the neutrons will continue to mutate until they're unable to suffer anymore and die from the disease. Technically speaking, the virus is infinite and will go on until death occurs. But Foundation research has found that human subjects have only been able to reach, at most, the anomaly's 6th stage, after which they die. Not a single test subject has persisted to the 7th iteration of the virus, as it's believed to be too much pain for the human body to handle. But if a subject did reach these impossible pain thresholds, they most likely wouldn't last much longer. Curiously, when the Foundation experimented with SCP-1007-RU on a rat, it survived 9 stages into the anomaly. However, the pain was too much for the researchers to bear observing, and the decision was made to put the poor creature out of its misery shortly after. Each stage follows a similar pattern, allowing it to be predictably cataloged and measured across all test subjects. First, the subject will experience severe pain just below their current pain tolerance threshold. After 36 hours, the pain will intensify, growing larger and more harmful for the victim, until they finally lose consciousness. A few minutes later, when the subject has fully regained consciousness, the next stage begins, and the process repeats itself. Only this time, the pain threshold is increased. Over time, this process will continue to repeat itself and grow more deadly until the subject expires, dying from severe levels of pain beyond any of our comprehension. What makes the disease even worse to contract is that this pain is unable to be suppressed. The Foundation has certainly tried, from analgesics to tranquilizers, and surely some mimetic agents designed to reduce painful sensations, but nothing has had any effect on an individual infected by SCP-1007-RU. They are forced to endure the pain without any reprieve for a full 36 hours before passing out. They can't even lose consciousness before the stage ends, meaning that the only break from SCP-1007-RU is the few short minutes in between stages, all before the process repeats itself again and again. Interestingly, the inactive period between stages, labeled the quiescence period, seems to increase exponentially as time goes on. The first period ranges from 48 to 108 hours, where the subject feels completely ordinary before the next active stage occurs and their pain tolerance is increased. The Foundation typically does not like to prolong the pain of its test subjects beyond what's absolutely necessary to understand all elements of an anomaly. The moral issues that resulted from SCP-1007-RU's research were addressed in a statement by Overseer 05-4. which read, "Human experiments are performed only with the explicit permission of the Overseer Council. Any requests for experiments in which a subject would have to reach the 6th stage are rejected automatically. First, try to imagine such pain." But regardless, experiments involving SCP-1007-RU have been performed for the purposes of gaining all of this information, and the Foundation kept recorded transcripts of some of them. One interview, which was held 2 hours 12 minutes after the first exposure to the virus, and then held again at 2 hours and 17 minutes following infection, involved an interaction between Dr. Lungen and an unfortunate patient. First, the patient felt fine and asked if the researcher had infected them with something. When asked to describe how they felt, they exclaimed that they felt fine and had been sitting there for 2 hours feeling normal. Then the virus took root, and a howling scream filled the room. The patient began to sob and scream, feeling pain unlike anything else they had felt before. Pain they didn't know they were capable of feeling. They called for Dr. Lungen to stop the experiment, asking why this was happening to them. But Lungen's assistant called for the subject to be restrained and locked up. As the pain increased, they became desperate, confessing to the crimes they had committed prior to being imprisoned and drafted as a Foundation D-Class personnel, and begging the Foundation to stop. But even if the Foundation wanted to, they couldn't. There was nothing they could do but watch. Adhering to the procedure, Dr. Lungen calmly told the subject to relax themselves and asked where they were feeling the pain. But the subject continued to scream, barely able to get the words out. Their head, skin, heart, stomach, bones, and teeth. Every last bit of their body was overwhelmed with nothing but pure pain. The subject begged and pleaded and struggled for hours until they eventually lost consciousness. Upon coming to, the subject asked what had happened, to which Dr. Lungen's assistant, junior researcher Kozmov, responded that he'll certainly remember in 2 days. Dr. Lungen was rightfully mortified by what he witnessed on that day, and protested further experimentation with SCP-1007-RU. Lungen appeared before the Overseer Council and advocated for the destruction of the virus, but the O5s were unable to accommodate his request, as they had already severely limited the experiments and were unsure of how to take measures to eradicate the virus completely. Lungen withdrew from the SCP-1007-RU research project, and the position of research head was given to his assistant, junior researcher Kozmov. Despite Kozmov's inexperience and sadistic tendencies to prolong and observe experiences, Lungen was let go. However, Kozmov's psychological evaluation was still within the lines of what the Foundation considered acceptable, and he was given permission to have complete control over all SCP-1007-RU research materials. The file ends with a single note, written by Kozmov shortly after his promotion to research head. Permission has been granted for experiments involving humans up to stage 9. M.S. Kozmov.
Whether these are 5-star luxury suites or seedy roach motels, there's something undeniably a little eerie about hotels. They're liminal spaces, transitional spots between origins and destinations. We've seen countless creepy hotel rooms in the horror genre, from Room 237 in The Shining's Overlook Hotel to the infamous Room 1408. But have you ever heard of Room 710? Also known by a different number, SCP-2432. This hotel room is one of the most terrifying out there, but the funny thing is, you won't ever hear a bad word said about it. Room 710 has glowing, if a little strangely worded, reviews across the board, and when you see how people rave about it online, you'll find yourself unable to resist paying it a visit. But don't be nervous, all these people can't be wrong, right? And after all, it's just a room. What kind of harm could a room really do? Let's ask Chuck Peel, one of the many victims of SCP-2432. He was a traveling businessman, caught in the rat race of relentless sales pitches and conferences that felt like they were slowly but surely sucking out his soul. His next conference was in State College, Pennsylvania, and he'd spend the evening researching different places he could potentially stay during the trip. Chuck had been disenchanted with chain hotels over the years. Seeing the exact same setups again and again all across the country only worsened the feeling that his life was going nowhere. That's why whenever he was traveling out of town, he always tried to find an interesting, independent place to hang his hat. That's what led him to the Redacted Hotel. The pictures seemed nice, sure, but what really caught his eye were the positively fantastic reviews. Little note, certain details have been redacted to avoid subjecting you, the viewer, to the mimetic effects nested in these reviews. After all, we wouldn't want you to develop a sudden hankering for room 710 and start buying your tickets to State College, Pennsylvania. The first review, found on TripAdvisor, said, "Another great stay in this fabulous hotel. The room was perfect, the staff friendly as always, and of course no better location than on this plane of many hives. I've enjoyed a drink at the friendly bar. This time I added a wonderful escape, and breakfast was cold and breakfast was warm. The restaurant has lovely ambience, and the food was over the top alive and kicking. Woo! Would stifle again. My husband eats out often and felt that this was one of the best one ever. Another great stay in this fabulous hotel. One more great item to add to the redacted. Another great stay in this fabulous hotel. Stayed July 1999, traveled with 3 family members." The second review, this time posted on Yelp, read, "We sailed on our boat into State College from outside State College through the night and the cold and arrived at 8 a.m. in State College. The hotel desk staff allowed us to check in and out 8 a.m. in the evening with our 64 young boys. This was absolutely awesome customer service. We can't thank you enough for allowing us to check in oh so early in State College. Earlier than war. The rest of the stay was fine. We spent almost all of our time in the room, mostly just to sleep. This location is ultra convenient with downtown State College and allowed me to make a midnight run for some of my favorite State College meat while the family was sleeping in State College downtown. Redacted. Downtown." And the final review, which Chuck Peel found particularly compelling, read, "Been coming to this region for 14 stone. What a blast. Scores of humans wandering the streets and staffing the hotel. My husband and I have walked drooling path to get here. Bed in room 710 was soft and cozy and appreciated the decor, would recommend the bed, and specifically the bed. Redacted. In the pool, and it was lovely crisp blue hydrogen and you could see all the people relax into a meandering menace. Towel slightly dirty. Gym was full of usable equipment, so you could train not in fear. And the local wildlife was remarkable. I visited the town in the past and have not seen many puma being feasted on. Redacted. And the toucan man were especially numerous today. Arrived July 2019, staying 3 days, months, 10 years. Well, these may seem like utter nonsense to you. To someone reading them without the key mimetic trigger phrases redacted, they create an irresistible urge to visit the hotel and stay in room 710. It was an urge so primal and powerful that he couldn't wait to get going. If only because he could finally stay in this wonderful hotel and see what all this fuss was about. He booked his tickets, and a few days later, he was at the check-in desk. Something you need to understand is that room 710 is extremely subtle in its anomalous methods. Unlike room 237 or room 1408, it won't attack the victims with ghosts or mind-warping hallucinations, nor will it drive them into acts of horrific violence against the ones they love or acts of self-destruction. One of the frightening things about room 710 is that while you're actually inside it, you can have an extremely pleasant stay. It's only once you leave that things start becoming truly terrifying, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Chuck made his way up to the room to take a shower and take the weight off his feet, and sure enough, the room seemed positively luxurious. 2 queen-size beds with fine linen, a spacious closet, a large flat-screen television, and a well-appointed bathroom with a combo shower bath. This was heaven. Sure, it was one more bed than he needed, but this meant he had a choice of which one he could sleep on. Fantastic. This is the insidious power of SCP-2432. There's nothing overt about the harm it causes at first. Chuck was more worried about the impending conference than he was about the fact he was in the belly of the anomalous beast. However, the SCP Foundation, through later analysis of the room, found that the anomalous elements aren't entirely ephemeral. There are certain details about the physical makeup of the room that causes and amplifies its effects. The walls are reinforced with hyper-strong aramid fibers, and it's believed that the very makeup of the room serves to create mind-warping oscillations that are undetectable to the conscious mind, but are particularly potent when the victim is asleep. Chuck didn't know it, but every moment he spent in that room, it was crawling into his head just that little bit more. He was already subconsciously composing his nonsensical, mimetic review of the place. As the night drew to a close, Chuck decided to relax and enjoy some television. The hotel's website boasted a wide variety of channels after all. But after switching through a few different channels, he came to rest at a channel simply called Room News. It was simple but soothing. An image of a sailboat in the middle of a pastoral lake, while what sounded like cheerful elevator music played. Chuck simply sat and enjoyed the relaxing ambiance for a moment before the music was interrupted by a deep British voice who began delivering a strange monologue. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, Chuck felt that this voice was speaking directly to him. "Let me describe something to you. This is a true story. It really happened to me. It could have happened to you. Every day you wake up and you go to your job, and there's just something off about your boss. He's weird and clingy and strange. Your workers are nice enough, but they don't communicate. They are quiet and out of it and absorbed in their own little worlds, and you are ignored. Not because you are ugly or awkward or rude, but because you are there. And you suspect things about your coworkers. Despite their habits and strange things each of them places on their Twitter pages, they seem to be doing so much better than you. How are you falling behind? And you should love the job. It is your passion. Most would die to be doing a job they are passionate about. You really should, but you can't. Wonder becomes routine, and routine becomes drudgery, and it's day in and day out, and you struggle to maintain your soul. This is not what should happen. Should is such a tormenting word, a thinking trap. Should. Your life is ruled by shoulds. You come home in your beat-up old car along the same boring street in your town. Everything is along that main drag, and you cannot really go elsewhere. Everything is overcast, and the pedestrians are idiots, and the drivers are too. You get home and have a million billion projects to accomplish. You should compete in the rat race, but you're bone tired. You promise your grandmother you should text her because she's going through chemo, and she only just figured out texting because she's getting old and having a hard time adjusting, and it's oh so painful for her, and you should be there, but the job is so demanding. You have 1,000 books you should be reading. You have 1,000,000 projects you should complete. The rent on your tiny apartment is due, and the dishes are piling high and dirty in the sink. You barely have enough money for pizza as you lie in your boxers on your greasy 10-year-old couch from an IKEA in Fishkill, New York that closed a year ago. You remember your mom taking you there as a kid. Then she left. You feel a deep, growing anxiety. The feeling of watching your life burn around you as you try and succeed for something great, to make your mark on society, but you cannot bring yourself to do so despite your convictions. The dread is horrible. It's all crumbling apart. The parade is passing you by, and you are helpless, immobile in your state like a great boulder made of disappointment, regret, depression, and malaise. There is nothing for you here. You need to leave this place. You have a choice. Get your good clean shirt and your smart pants and announce you are taking a break. Don't even pack. Don't even bring your phone. One simple call to the office and get on your way. Take that beat-up old car from the garage underneath your apartment complex. Give your cat the last of his food and some water and hit the road. Leave the town and your ex and the promises you made and your job and your grandmother and your responsibilities and worries. What I recommend you do is simple. Find a hotel, not a motel or something shabby, a hotel. Even a chain will do. Hotels are simply remarkable, aren't they? Clean and elegant, all modernistic and designed to appeal in the eye. You don't even need to care about a thing in the world. Food is provided. They clean up after you, and you can feel like you have some luxury for once. Most even have pools and fitness centers where you can finally get in shape and pick your life up. It's a chance to step back and regroup. Take a look at the customers around you. Travelers, most. Strange people. Interesting people. People you won't ever see again. Travel is so romantic, so mysterious. My, what stories these people probably have. And the staff also all are so attentive in their smart little uniforms. Don't listen to the naysayers. These people all love their jobs. You know they do. The room is amazing. The wallpaper is elegant, and the paintings make you feel at ease. There are clean towels every day, and the bed is freshly made. You can escape the oncoming storm outside. The thunder crashing down on the roof like ball bearings. You could live your whole life in this place. Enjoy the sugary cereals at the breakfast buffet. Get a loyalty card and pay no money. Traveling really changes a man, relaxes him, shapes him up into a better person. You become a better person by staying in a hotel. Strong, social, a proper soldier. You adapt to the hotel mindset. Enjoy the soft music and eat that fresh waffle. Grab a beer in the evening with your fellow transients from the attached sports bar. Relax and watch that old showing of that superhero movie on your TV. Live here forever. Enjoy the hotel. Become the hotel. Never leave. Why would you want to leave? Even when you do walk out of these pristine glass sliding doors, you are empty. The hotel is in your soul now, and you feel a worse person away from it. You feel yourself slipping back into that gray life. A black hole is in your heart. Your soul is the hotel. Your consciousness is the hotel. You are now one with your accommodations. Your accommodations are your life. Ascend. Isn't that lovely? As he fell asleep, Chuck found himself nodding. Yes, that is lovely. How nice it would be to ascend. Little did he know he was receiving a broadcast from SCP-2432-1, a small boil-like creature affixed to the back of the television. Foundation tests have revealed that this creature is made from a mix of human, rockfish, and pig-like DNA. It only causes strange broadcasts when affixed to the back of this particular television. But that's fine. Chuck rather enjoyed the show. It gave him a lot to think about. He left the hotel a changed man a few days later, once the conference was finally over, and gave it a glowing review. It was not long after he'd returned home that he began to notice the changes taking place. Nothing extreme at first, just gaining some weight, and then, a little stranger, he began to develop a purple rash that just wouldn't go away. As the rash worsened, it seemed to take on almost a floral pattern. Chuck didn't mind. If ever you asked him, he'd just murmur something about ascending. Then the changes got worse. A television-shaped protrusion made from bone began to grow in Chuck's stomach. His intestines became rickety porcelain pipes. His liver turned into a plush, well-fluffed pillow. His muscles began to take on a similar quality to the aramid fibers in the walls of room 710. But still, he didn't mind. As he got bigger and bigger, he didn't mind. As his organs and bones transformed into furniture inside him, he didn't mind. He didn't even mind when his body got so large that it formed a roughly cube-like shape. In fact, he couldn't be happier. He was just like that room, that beautiful, wonderful room. Just like the man on the television said, he was now one with the accommodation, and he couldn't be happier. He'd never much enjoyed being a human anyway. Such is the fate of everyone who stays in SCP-2432 eventually. You'll love the room so much that eventually, you'll start emulating it. Sure, that may seem frightening to you now, but don't worry. On the other end of the transformation, you'll be much more accommodating. Anomalous creatures in the SCP Foundation's universe are not a rarity. Dealing with anomalous sapient life forms is the Foundation's bread and butter, whether it's talkative sea slugs or a body-stealing swarm of ants.
For those of you who haven't read their ethics committee guidebooks, sapient anomalies are defined as creatures who have a keen sense of self-awareness and can communicate. From the zaniness of Dr. Bright and his amulet to the neck-cracking SCP-173, these sapient anomalous entities come in all shapes and sizes. But when does a creature become so sapient they can be considered anomalous? Take the humble octopus, for example, who also just so happens to be the subject of today's video. The octopus is a boneless, 8-legged creature capable of shifting the color and texture of its skin, and will blast predators with a black substance to blind them. If I read that in an SCP Foundation file, I might think those researchers found an alien creature. But no, octopi, or octopods, are, as you know, real living, breathing creatures you can see at any aquarium. Another interesting quirk of octopods is their intelligence. These creatures are smart, extremely smart. Hell, they'll even use fallen coconuts as a sort of armor against enemies. If tool use isn't intelligence, I don't know what is. You may be wondering, how can you make an octopus more anomalous than what I've already described? Well, today on SCP Explained, we'll be taking a look at SCP-2967, the sapient cephalopods, to answer that exact question. We've all probably been to aquariums. Dark, ambient rooms where the only light comes from behind the massive tanks filled to the brim with colorful fish and crustaceans. They can be fun to explore, but when you've seen a bunch of exotic fish once, it's not like you're clamoring to get back in soon. This was the problem faced by the Galaxy Aquarium in May of 2010. Attendance was low, and profit was lower. The owner of the aquarium was a man by the name of Mark Hemphill. He was young and extremely ambitious. Mark had an interest in marine life since he was a child, and dedicated his life to studying the creatures of the sea. When he opened the aquarium, he had just gotten out of college. He hoped his passion and his aquarium would inspire even just one child to pursue the study of marine life as he did. Mark's ambitious personality was not going to let him watch his life's work go to waste. At a nearby auction house, the anomalous group of interest Marshall, Carter, and Dark were organizing a showing for their new batch of anomalous creatures available for bidding. Seasoned viewers of SCP Explained have likely run into anomalies that Marshall, Carter, and Dark have had a hand in. For those not in the loop, Marshall, Carter, and Dark are dealers of anomalous goods and services, selling anomalies to the highest bidder, no matter who they are. From the average Joe to a tyrannical dictator, Marshall, Carter, and Dark only care about cold, hard cash, and getting as much of it as they can. Mark, hearing whispers of a massive auction coming up, decided to attend. He entered the auction house, an old dilapidated warehouse on the sketchy side of town. Not exactly inspiring confidence, but Mark thought maybe, just maybe, there would be something for him to add to his aquarium to get more attendees. Mark walked through the heavy metal doors to an immaculate auction space. The building was loaded with well-dressed individuals who gazed over the items they had for sale. Wooden tables lined the walls of the warehouse, and on top of each table were tanks and cages of creatures Mark never thought could exist. From dogs that smelled like candles to purple frogs that telepathically communicated with the people around them. Mark was convinced that there was something here he could use. A staff member approached Mark almost immediately. It was as if the staff could smell the willingness to spend money on him. She was an older woman, dressed in a fine purple-hued suit. She spoke with a comforting candor to Mark, asking him about his day and what brought him to the auction house. She introduced herself as Jay, and said that the auction house had just the thing for Mark before he could even get the words out. They walked to the opposite side of the building, where a purple curtain was erected. Walking through, it was as if Mark had returned back to his aquarium. What were the odds that this place would have a marine life section? Oddly, for such a well-designed room, there was only one small tank placed in it. Within it was 6 octopods, a pale yellow in color. Mark immediately recognized the species as the common octopus. The Galaxy Aquarium already had a cephalopod section with much more rare species than the common octopus. Dejected, Mark almost gave up hope before Jay approached the tank and kneeled. Jay seemed concerned, then called out the name Levi. From under the table on which the tank stood, a massive octopus slithered into sight, startling Mark. It was at least 5 feet in height and length. That's impossible, Mark thought. There's no way that an octopus of this species could get to be this large. The octopus's size was not the only oddity it held, though. Jay began to scold Levi for leaving its tank and asked what it had to say for itself. She threw a Sharpie marker to the ground for Levi, who uncapped it and began to write out the word, "sorry," on the concrete floor. This couldn't be, Mark thought. There was absolutely no way that an octopus can learn to understand English, let alone write it. Jay turned to Mark, encouraging him to talk to Levi. What's your name?" Mark asked sheepishly. He couldn't believe he was trying to talk to an octopus. As soon as the words left his mouth, the octopus spelled out Levi with its marker. Mark couldn't believe it. This had to be some trick, right? Some sort of marketing gimmick to get him to buy an overgrown piece of calamari. There is no way that an octopus could have self-awareness. Mark knew they were smart, of course. He had studied these things for years. But knowing its name, that's not possible. "What are you?" Mark questioned, hoping to figure out if it was an animatronic instead of a living, breathing animal. Levi began to write on the floor again. Not a word this time, but a symbol. The octopus first drew a large oval, then 8 lines coming from the bottom, a crude drawing of an octopus. Behind Levi, the other 6 octopodes were watching him as spectators, seeming to clap when Levi finished the drawing. Jay, with a smug grin on her face, asked Mark if he was impressed. The look on Mark's face already told the story, so Jay began to go over the pricing of the creatures. Levi and the other 6 octopodes were a package deal, with a starting bid for all 7 placed at $3,000. Mark, without a second thought, asked if he could outright purchase Levi and his compatriots for $10,000. Jay's smile grew wider, and she shook Mark's hand without another word said. Levi and the 6 other octopodes were delivered to the Galaxy Aquarium the next day. Within that time, Mark had already prepared an unused section for the arrival of his new attraction. The cephalopods were placed in their tanks without much difficulty and settled into their new home. Advertising began for the Galaxy Aquarium's newest attraction, the talking octopus. Mark even splurged on a billboard on the nearby highway. This investment was meant to save the aquarium, and for the next few months, attendance skyrocketed. Now we know why the SCP Foundation keeps a heavy watch over anomalous entities in the public, because all it takes is one ambitious person before the entire world knows that anomalies exist. With the popularity of Levi, it was a matter of time before the SCP Foundation heard of it. It was time for an investigation. Site 12 was a site dedicated to marine life, and as such, many of the personnel stationed there had the appropriate expertise to deal with the anomaly. Agent Hooper volunteered for the investigation. He was ordered to pose as an animal behavior specialist from the Sea Coral Pacific Federation. Real creative there, SCP Foundation. It just so happened that at the same time Agent Hooper was getting involved, Levi was beginning to give Mark a hard time at his aquarium. It was a late night in January 2011. The aquarium had since closed after another day of almost full attendance. Levi was not sleeping, however. He was hungry, and by coincidence, the section of the Galaxy Aquarium next to Levi's tank was a potential all-you-could-eat buffet should his plan come to fruition. The next day, aquarium staff awoke to the filtration system of the crab enclosure being blocked by one of Levi's friends. It was quickly removed and placed back into its proper tank. It wasn't out of the ordinary for octopodes to escape their tanks. As I explained, they're smart creatures. Aquarium staff began the process of moving the crabs to a temporary tank, while repairs and cleaning on the original tank were taking place. As their attention was drawn to the damaged filter and contaminated crab tank, Levi managed to escape and enter the unguarded temporary tank of crabs. Broken shells and water splattered the floor of the temporary tank room as the feast began. It was a massacre. Levi ate 20 of the 40 crabs and another 10 were dropped off into the octopus's tank for Levi's comrades. Satisfied with its meal, Levi returned to his tank as if nothing had happened. An hour passed before the leftovers of Levi's dinner were discovered, and it didn't take much guessing on the part of aquarium staff to deduce who was behind this. Agent Hooper arrived the next day and asked to meet with Mark. Hooper explained that he was from the Sea Coral Pacific Federation, and his place of employment had heard of Levi and wanted to study him. Mark, like a moth to a flame, eagerly took the opportunity to describe the remarkable events of the previous day. Hooper nodded along with the story and promised to figure out why Levi was acting this way. Agent Hooper was escorted to the talking octopus section of the aquarium and asked for some privacy, which he was granted. Levi was sitting on a large mound of sand, while the smaller octopods sat in front of it as if they were intently listening. Levi was apparently lecturing the group, using a sharp rock to carve words and pictures on the plexiglass walls of the tank. Agent Hooper knocked on the glass, startling the group. In anger, Levi swam to the front of the tank and stared at Agent Hooper. With a tentacle, it knocked hard on the glass and then endeavored to return to its lecture. Agent Hooper didn't catch the hint that he was unwelcome and stayed uncomfortably close to the glass until Levi couldn't ignore the agent any longer. The octopus held up 5 tentacles and made a shooing motion towards Hooper, who was incredibly surprised. Hooper recognized the motion as the phrase, "go away," in sign language. Hooper responded, asking Levi, "Sign language?" in sign language. In response, Levi once again held up 5 tentacles and created what appeared to be a fist, then bobbed it back and forth like a head nodding. An octopus that knows sign language. Not the most dangerous or extraordinary anomaly that the Foundation has ever discovered, but still, this anomaly could not remain out of containment. Hooper quickly contacted the research head at Site 12 and explained the situation. He needed a containment van for an aquatic anomaly, a containment force, and Class A amnestics immediately. This request was granted. Foundation Mobile Task Force Lambda 12 Pest Control stormed the building and wrangled the aquarium staff into a closet so they couldn't interfere. The agents were dressed in their tactical armor and held large rifles, but this was only to show that they were meant to be taken seriously and not to be used for force. A white unmarked containment van arrived soon after. Foundation researchers ran into the building and transported Levi and his students into the temporary tanks of the containment van and made sure they were securely closed and locked multiple times. When each octopus was secured, an airborne version of A-class amnestics was distributed throughout the aquarium by the Mobile Task Force agents, leading to all knowledge of Levi being forgotten by the aquarium staff and Mark. For further containment, the SCP Foundation distributed liquid amnestics into the city's water supply, so that anyone who saw one of Levi's performances would forget that it ever happened. The SCP Foundation classified Levi as SCP-2967 and discovered the full extent of its anomalous attributes. SCP-2967, of course, has the ability to communicate through written language, is able to recognize and identify colors, symbols, and individual figures of other species, and holds an abnormally high intellect, almost comparable to an average human's intelligence. The 6 comrades of SCP-2967 were designated as SCP-2967-1, as they do not seem to be at the same level of intellect as SCP-2967. Through behavioral analysis and research, it was found that SCP-2967 will refer to SCP-2967-1 as its students, friends, or army. Dr. Reynard, the head researcher on the SCP-2967 anomaly, began hosting intelligence checkups on SCP-2967 every 2 weeks. These consisted of Levi talking to Dr. Reynard through the use of a waterproof magnetic slate, while the doctor asked Levi questions. On one such occasion, the Foundation discovered that there may be more creatures similar to SCP-2967 and its students. Dr. Reynard began by drawing a crab, an octopus, and SCP-2967's toy. He labeled them Crab, Friend, and Toy. On its slate, SCP-2967 wrote, "like," and then a sketch of a heart. Dr. Reynard drew a check mark on his clipboard before rewarding SCP-2967 with a prawn. Following up, Dr. Reynard asked if there was anything Levi didn't like. To display this concept, Dr. Reynard drew an X over a heart symbol. Levi paused for a moment, seeming to think, then drew what appeared to be a bird with outstretched wings and an angular beak. Upon finishing the drawing, the octopus's skin changed to a deep red color. Levi wrote, "Don't know word" on his slate, then returned to its normal colorization. Reynard displayed a photo of a pigeon to Levi, who marked an X on his slate, signifying that there was something wrong, before shifting its skin black. In response, Dr. Reynard returned to a picture of a crow to Levi, who scrambled to write on its slate. "That word," it wrote hastily. Reynard responded, "crow."
With his newfound knowledge, Levi drew a heart with an X through it on its slate, then spelled out, "Don't like crow." Dr. Renard was confused. How do two species of creatures who live in completely different habitats have a disdain for each other? SCP-2967 began to explain. Levi sketched an octopus, a crow, and what appeared to be a human. Over the head of the human, Levi drew an arrow pointing at the human, before drawing a check mark over the sketch of the octopus and the crow. Levi connected the check marks to the arrow above the human with two lines. It seemed that the crows and the octopod's disdain come from their common ability to connect and grow fond of humans. The intelligence check concluded after Levi explained this to Dr. Renard, as the octopus claimed it was tired and wanted to return to its containment chamber. The next day, however, it seemed that SCP-2967 had correctly predicted what would happen at Site-12. On April 3, 2011, research staff at Site-12 reported a high concentration of American crows surrounding the building. Many were perched in trees or on the roof of the site, but some were simply hovering near the entrances, seeming to hope that the door would open. While the crows weren't aggressive to humans, they would fly to a window connected to the containment chamber of SCP-2967 and peck on it. This continued for hours, and it seems that the crows were threatening Levi and his friends. The Foundation deployed Mobile Task Force Lambda-4 birdwatchers to Site-12. This team was not armed in your standard tactical gear and heavy weaponry. They wore camouflage clothing, with shoes that muffled their footsteps in grassy environments. They had jackets of thick leather to prevent injuries from talons or beaks, and they had specialized pellet guns they used to incapacitate anomalous birds. They began by shooting the birds away and capturing a few using nets for further study. As they concluded, all but one of the crows dispersed. This crow was, similar to Levi, much larger compared to non-anomalous members of its species. The large crow flew 10 feet from the entrance of the site and spat the decaying remains of one common octopus out onto the asphalt parking lot before retreating. The birdwatchers attempted to follow the group of crows, but the flock was impossible to track. What was found, however, was an area in a nearby forest that contained an abnormally large number of feathers belonging to the American crow species, as well as numerous small makeshift huts made of sticks and dying leaves, and a collection of various litter fashioned into basic tools, such as hammers made of bolts and toothbrushes. The most surprising item retrieved during this exploration was the torn remnants of a copy of the documentation for SCP-2967, kept in the largest hut. As is standard, the SCP Foundation enacted surveillance procedures on this location, placing hidden cameras and microphones as well as traps. The large crow has been classified as SCP-2967-B. So it seems that the animal kingdom is at war for the favor of the human race. While the Foundation only knows for sure that octopods and crows are at battle, there may be many more species out there who look to curry our favor. Who do you think will be the victors should battle commence?
It goes without saying that the SCP Foundation has a storied history with ancient, anomalous groups of interest. From the metal-worshipping Mechanites, to the fire-loving Brazen Heart, to even the brutal empire of the slave-owning Deva, who swear allegiance to the dreaded Scarlet King. But perhaps the most dangerous and downright disgusting of these groups are the flesh-worshipping, disease-loving, body-warping Sarkists. The Sarkists believe in returning humanity to a nightmarish primordial state. They utilize anomalies to achieve this goal, such as the horrible SCP-610, also known as the Flesh That Hates, a disease that converts human beings into mindless beasts of twisted flesh, driven to spread their disease further and further. The Sarkists were once a world superpower, controlling much of modern-day Russia and Eastern Europe from the holy capital of Aditum, a city ahead of its time, with towering blood-red temples, wide, winding roads, and the castle of Grand Karcist Ion, an immense blistering red and gold structure that was as beautiful as it was imposing. It would only make sense that the former area of the Sarkic Empire would host some of the most ghastly of the Sarkic anomalies. It should not be forgotten that while the Sarkists are a group of interest for the SCP Foundation, they are first and foremost a religion, one with ancient practices of blood and human sacrifice. While the SCP Foundation is famed for its containment procedures, When it comes to the likes of actual deity entities, containment isn't quite as straightforward. The standard put it in a box until it stops trying to get out technique just won't cut it. The deities require specific practices that sometimes go against the core values of secure, contain, protect. Take SCP-2845 for example. This entity, known as the Deer, is a being that requires an intense, deadly, and specific ritual to keep it properly contained. The SCP Foundation even had to outsource help in containing this anomaly. Anomalies such as these place the SCP Foundation at a crossroads of action or inaction. And when this issue is combined with a sarkic anomaly, that could bring catastrophic results should containment fail. They need to make the difficult choice of letting the anomaly stay where it is without intervention for the safety of the world. This nightmare started in the year 1916. During the Battle of Transylvania of the First World War, as bullets flew and the smell of smoke pervaded the noses of the scared soldiers, bloodlusting beasts were waiting their time to strike. Staking behind the unnaturally curved trunks of the trees that lived in the nearby Hoya forest, soldiers, armed with weapons and tactical armor, were quickly and brutally attacked and consumed by entities that would become known as the Pale Men. At the time, not much was known about these Pale Men, and they were believed to be a myth among the local populace, meant to scare invading soldiers from stepping on Romanian land. But when 244 people go randomly missing in a single night, with no obvious signs of death, no bodies ever being found, and reports of pale men dashing through trenches and within the surrounding Hoya forest, the SCP Foundation would surely have to intervene. This would not occur until 1919, however, as World War I raged on, diverting Foundation attention away from these mysterious deaths. Agents Frederick Harper and Reese Gorman, posing as military officials and local law enforcement, began to speak with the locals around the Hoya forest and the surviving soldiers. While shell shock rocked the soldiers with guilt and terror, Gorman was able to ascertain that the soldiers' stories of the Pale Men were too consistent to be a falsehood created out of stress. The Pale Men were described as living vampires, more bat than human, and deadly fast, appearing in quick flashes before dragging the unsuspecting victims to their untimely deaths within the Hoya forest. Meanwhile, Agent Gorman spoke with members of a village within the Hoya forest near the battle site. Their demeanor was cold, which was expected. He was an outsider, speaking rudimentary Romanian in an obviously foreign tongue. The village people claimed ignorance, declaring that they had never heard stories of pale men and did not subscribe to fairy tales. Gorman, realizing he was unwanted, nearly cut his losses before the elder of the village stopped him. This elder, an old man draped in hand-knit scarves and red silks, invited the agent into his home and gave him the truth. These villagers were followers of Sarkicism. The home of the elder was decorated with Sarkic glyphs and paintings detailing the stories of Yaldabaoth, the primary god of the Sarkists, battling Mechane, the legendary broken god. On a lectern sat scrolls and dusty tomes detailing Sarkic history, from former kings to stories of battles that were waged against the Mechanites and Davites. The elder explained that there was a Sarkic god within the Hoya forest, known as the Mother, who sends out her children to feed and help her grow even larger. The village worshipped the Mother and tried their best to keep her at bay by conducting ritual sacrifices to her and her brood. However, the advent of World War I led to difficulties in containing their rituals, as they were living in an active war zone, and the Mother's children and their hunger were impossible to control, leading to the unfortunate deaths of the soldiers. Agent Gorman was eventually able to convince the elder to show them where the Mother resided, a temple superficially resembling other Eastern Orthodox monasteries, but this was no house of God that you or I would recognize. On the lower level, it contained an ancient beast, starving for blood and sacrifice. This place soon became designated SCP-2191, otherwise known as the Dracula Factory. New containment procedures were quickly enacted. 20 armed guards were placed around the temple, with strict orders to dispatch any entity that exits the structure. Standard containment procedures for anomalous buildings were enacted as well, preventing all non-Foundation personnel from entering SCP-2191 and authorizing the use of lethal force when necessary. Access to SCP-2191 has allowed Foundation biologists to research the entities that were known as the Pale Men. These creatures were found to be genetically human, but with a variety of alterations that should have resulted in fatalities. These entities were subsequently designated SCP-2191-1. SCP-2191-1 entities appear to be more bat than human, with large conical ears that end in sharp tips, upturned noses, and the ability to communicate via echolocation. This echolocation ability comes in handy, as SCP-2191-1 are completely blind. Their eyes have recessed into their skulls, and a layer of skin has grown over them. The entities also lack pigmentation, leaving them starky pale, appearing to be made more of porcelain than flesh or bone. These entities are predators, solely hunting living human beings, ignoring human cadavers or any non-human animal. They hunt by spreading through the Hoya forest and chasing their victims. Once caught, SCP-2191 entities will inject their victims with a paralytic agent by stabbing them with a sharp bone that has grown from their wrists. They will then unhinge their jaws, allowing a leech-like entity to exit their mouths and begin the feeding process by latching onto the victim's neck. This leech, designated as SCP-2191-2, will first inject the body with digestive enzymes, converting organ, muscle, and bone into liquid before consuming the resulting fluids. The feeding process can last anywhere from 20 to 50 minutes, depending on the size of its prey. These are highly skilled and sophisticated predators, and while they lack the higher intelligence of non-anomalous humans, they make up for it in ruthless ferocity. It would only make sense that the Foundation would enact strict containment procedures to avoid the loss of human life. But while these containment methods worked for a time, a series of anomalous events connected to SCP-2191 transpired over the next 70 years. The first event was in late September of 1932. The Irissos earthquake devastated the Chalkidiki Peninsula of Greece, leaving houses crumbled, civilians homeless, and causing 490 reported casualties. Surveys of the damage conducted by the Greek government found that 126 people who lived in the affected areas could not be accounted for. The question now arises: where are these missing people? 7 years later in 1939, this time in Turkey, the Erzincan earthquake struck the country, resulting in the catastrophic deaths of approximately 33,000 people. Among the survivors, reports of a great serpent were given from all who witnessed the event. The Foundation then intervened, posing as members of an international disaster recovery agency. Reports from the locals remained the same. A great serpent, a deep red and black in color and incomprehensibly massive, casting dark shadow miles long, rose from the ground at the onset of the earthquake and writhed in the air as the earth shook. For a period of 3 years, nothing related to SCP-2191 transpired, and the Foundation believed that the anomaly had gone dormant. That was until an earthquake struck Vranța, Romania in 1940. While casualties were low compared to the earthquake in Turkey, reports from local survivors had repeated claims that pale men attacked the fleeing people as the earthquake occurred, chasing after them and tackling them, never to be seen again. With a large-scale event like this and potential witnesses to anomalous beings, the SCP Foundation was risking a broken masquerade scenario should the information spread. Broken masquerade scenarios are considered an XK-class scenario by the SCP Foundation, and as such, they employed a media blackout and had newspapers state that the witnesses of these vampire attacks were nothing but superstition. In March 1953 in Turkey, the Yenisgoyen earthquake led to the deaths of over 1,000 people. The Foundation, once again posing as members of an international disaster recovery agency, interviewed survivors and attempted to find any connection to the preceding events. Reports from survivors again told a consistent story. They witnessed the arm of a blood-red octopus rupture from the earth when the quake began, behaving similar to the great serpent writhing in the sky, and reported that pale men were seen attacking survivors in the night as they searched for places to sleep. These sightings of pale men persisted for over a month after the earthquake, before amnestics could be distributed. Another event occurred in March of 1977 in Romania. It was a similar story to all the others, with over 1,500 civilians dying as a result of the Varancia earthquake, and 800 civilians being declared missing. Foundation officials embedded in the Romanian government were told that reports of pale men and tendrils pulling victims beneath the ground began to surface, leading to media blackouts and amnestic distribution as panic spread throughout the region. The Foundation couldn't figure out what was causing these events. When they began instituting the containment procedures around SCP-2191, no SCP-2191-1 entities were able to exit the temple without being quickly dispatched. So how were these events occurring, especially in areas so far away from the Hoya forest? Could it be that the large creature seen breaching the earth was responsible? The Foundation decided to return to the village that originally told them about the temple to interview their elder once more. Dr. Judith Lowe was given permission to conduct the interview. She was a senior employee of the SCP Foundation and had multiple doctorates in Sarkic history and Sarkic anthropology. Her expertise in the subject was unmatched. Dr. Lowe had written multiple studies on the Sarkic culture and understood the only thing that satiates Sarkic gods: blood. With this knowledge in mind, Dr. Lowe met with Draga Negrescu, the current elder of the village. Draga was an old woman, wrapped in the red silks and scarves as the previous elder. Dr. Lowe began to interview and jumped immediately into the subject, asking Draga what she could tell her about the temple. Draga replied, stating that the temple was home of what they called the Mother. The Mother was not unlike a queen bee, as she sends her drones out to collect blood much like bees collect nectar. Draga continued, stating that her village acted as the beekeepers to the Mother, helping the hive flourish and stay full before the SCP Foundation intervened. Draga expressed that it was imperative that they would be allowed to continue their sacred duty of satiating the Mother. Dr. Lowe needed more information on who exactly the Mother was. Draga Negrescu told her that the Mother was once a princess and the daughter of a Sarkic blood empress in Aritum, the ancient Sarkic capital. She was a strikingly beautiful girl, wearing the finest of clothes and had long, dark red hair, a trait common to those with ancient royal Sarkic bloodlines. When she walked through the streets of Aditum, all eyes turned toward her. The Grand Karcist Ion was struck by her beauty and kidnapped the princess, claiming her as his own. She became his mistress. While she first hated her position, she slowly grew to worship Grand Karcist Ion as a god. While Grand Karcist Ion is seen as a deity now, he was not during his reign as the king of the Sarkic Empire. The princess begged to bear Ion's children as a result. She was blessed by the Grand Karcist and was planted in the Koya forest to grow large and wide. Ion commanded the princess to bear as many children as she could muster, and she did. The princess birthed Ion's children, the Pale Ones, for all of eternity, and would let them feed as Ion would want. Draga stated that she and her village are no different than the Pale Men, as they were tasked with keeping the Mother fed and satisfied. Draga then let slip this chilling remark.
The Mother and the land are now one. Her earthen womb swells, and soon she will rupture. All around you is tinder for the gods.
It seems as though the Foundation's containment efforts led to the deadly earthquakes and deaths of thousands of people. By stopping the practices of this village to contain the Mother through ritual, they had potentially caused an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario. One question remained though: where is the Mother? An investigation into the tunnel system located below SCP-2191 would lead to the answer. Mobile task force units that specialized in underground exploration, such as the Mole Rats, were sent to the tunnel system below the temple, armed with weapons to dispatch any loose SCP-2191-1 entities. These agents discovered a grisly sight. a massive writhing mass below SCP-2191. Researchers, believing Draga's story, ascertained that this was the mother and designated it as SCP-2191-3. This entity is a massive blood-red organism buried deep beneath the earth, where SCP-2191 stands. The true size of the entity has proven entirely impossible to measure, but root-like appendages have been found to extend throughout the tunnels below the earth. These appendages were found to secrete a toxic, highly corrosive acid. SCP-2191-3 uses this fluid to create tunnels, which explains the odd tunnels below SCP-2191-2.
Measurements place the area SCP-2191 spread to approximately 6,600,000 square kilometers under the Balkan Peninsula.
For comparison's sake, SCP-3000, the amnestic-producing eel god Anatashisha, is a measly 900 kilometers in length at maximum. With that in mind, now we can see the gargantuan problem the SCP Foundation is dealing with. SCP-2191-3 is sapient, meaning it has an innate sense of understanding and self-awareness, and it exerts control over SCP-2191-1 and SCP-2191-2 organisms via the release of complex pheromones. SCP-2191-1 entities act as feeder drones for SCP-2191-3. It has since been discovered that civilians native to several isolated villages in the vicinity of the Hoya Forest have actively provided human sacrifices for SCP-2191 as a means of minimizing the seismic activity that occurs when it is famished, and this worked to satiate the entity and prevent further damage to the Earth and its people. The Foundation now stood at the crossroad between active containment and allowing the people who knew and understood the anomaly to contain it themselves. The Foundation motto is Secure, Contain, Protect. However, if they allow Draga Negrescu and her village to continue their sacrifices, they will be unable to fulfill any of these core values. But SCP-2191 will not be wreaking havoc. This dilemma led to the involvement of the O5 Council. A joint statement from them reads, "There are some who wish to believe that the Foundation has never nor will ever cater to the designs and desires of an anomalous entity. Foundation efforts to contain SCP-2191 are now thought to have inadvertently led to the deaths of approximately 40,000 people over 45 years. The obvious choice would be to neutralize the threat, and we've tried. The number of civilian and Foundation casualties being well beyond acceptable numbers. In order to contain the larger threat, we must allow it to feed. We are aware of the offense caused by this procedure. This is not the first time, nor it will be the last, that the Foundation has been forced to commit a lesser evil in the prevention of a greater one. We do believe that, in the end, our current method is the most preferable, with regards to both ethics and efficiency. We are fully aware that every sacrifice feeds SCP-2191-3, allowing it and its brood to thrive. But we are not about to sacrifice the entire Balkan Peninsula to neutralize that threat. Not yet." It was clear that the SCP Foundation had no choice but to allow the villagers who lived around SCP-2191 and the Mother to continue their practices. Upon their involvement, there was catastrophe after catastrophe that would only stop once the correct people, Draga Negrescu and her villagers, could return to their way of life and end this madness. A final containment procedure was ordered as a result. The SCP Foundation would maintain surveillance operations via the use of closed-circuit security cameras and drone footage. All personnel of the SCP Foundation would be prohibited from directly interfering with SCP-2191 or the ritual practices of communities within the vicinity of the Hoya Forest, which include blood or human sacrifices to SCP-2191. Exploration of SCP-2191 would only be allowed by remote-controlled drones. Lethal force is only authorized should SCP-2191 or any of the creatures that live beneath it breach containment. Should the Foundation fail in upholding the ritual practices that keep the Mother at bay, well, Draga Negrescu said it best.
All around them is tinder for the gods.
SCP-3930 does not exist. Thanks for watching. Now check out SCP. The following information is only known to 7 living people. Even those actively guarding this anomaly will never know this information. Every single person who believes they are aware of the existence of SCP-3930 has the potential to increase its danger. SCP-3930 has been given the risk class Critical, the highest possible risk class for an anomaly, meaning that individuals nearby will invariably be exposed to acute, life-threatening harm, and that these effects cannot be mitigated. You learn about SCP-3930 at your own risk, with the knowledge that this awareness puts your life at hazard. Someday soon, you may be forced to make the ultimate sacrifice for the good of all life and matter in the universe. That is why it is imperative that you know one essential thing. SCP-3930 does not exist. Now with that out of the way, we have only one question for you. Can you hear the screaming? It was when Dr. Vasilyev heard the screaming that he and his ragtag team of scientists knew it was already over. The year was 1971, and Dr. Vasilyev's team was stationed at a highly secretive Soviet research outpost near what would later be established as the Russian town of Usinsk within the Komi Republic. As far as Dr. Vasilyev was concerned, they were dead men already. Well, that's not entirely accurate. To be dead is to be something, and the men that had once been stationed with them but were here no longer could not be considered something at all. Their brush with the immensely powerful and classified anomaly later known as SCP-3930 had robbed them of their very existence. Now Dr. Vasilyev knew that he and the few remaining men stationed at the base with him would be next. The Soviet government had dispatched a detachment consisting of around 100 soldiers and scientists to investigate the anomaly in the Komi Republic. As far as they could tell, it appeared to occupy a 1-kilometer square area within a forest. But to say that it really occupied anything would be a stretch. And out of the over 100 men who had been dispatched, now scarcely 30 remained. Observation teams had been sent into the anomalous zone to collect data on what exactly they were dealing with. But each time, it seemed as though the researchers were doomed to know less and less about what they were investigating. From a distance, the area didn't even appear to be anomalous. It looked simply like a continuation of the forest, complete with the expected flora, fauna, and even some distant evidence of human habitation, like an abandoned building. But without fail, nobody who had ever seen the building up close had ever returned. Thanks to SCP-3930, they had simply ceased to be, because simply put, when you introduce something into nothing, then nothing wins. Dr. Vasilyev had seen too many good men disappear into oblivion, and soon it would be his turn too. But first something horrible would crawl out of the zone, something that shouldn't exist, something that didn't exist, something that will never exist. And yet, here it was. In science, the observer effect is a dreaded phenomenon. All experiments involve the observation of phenomena to collect data and then prove or disprove a hypothesis. But the observer effect describes the frustrating scenario where the mere act of observing a phenomenon alters it, reducing the usefulness of the data. A common example of this in mundane life is checking the pressure of your car or bike's tires. To do this, you need to let out some air, thus changing the pressure. But pressure holds a very different meaning when you're working with what might be the universe's largest patch of nothing. Because of their prime directive, namely researching the anomaly, Dr. Vasilyev and his fellow scientists were effectively forced to observe SCP-3930, and 3930 apparently doesn't like that. The scientists only noticed sounds at first, barely perceptible little screeches that could easily be written off as your mind playing a trick on you. And in a sense, it is. But around SCP-3930, the tricks played by the mind become a lot more practical than anywhere else. What started as sounds soon came to take on a visual form as more people became aware of the anomaly and made futile attempts to observe it from the outside. These scattered visual and audio forms soon became nicknamed screamers for their horrific, hateful wailing. Dr. Vasilyev and his team believed that despite the extremely hostile nature of the anomalies, they had no way of ever leaving the anomalous zone. That belief was soon proved wrong, and not long after, only 10 researchers remained. It seemed that the last of Dr. Vasilyev's hope died with the lost men,
but there was some good news at least. With only 10 left to observe the SCP-3930 anomaly, the screamers began to disappear and the anomalous zone became stable once more. 10, it seemed, was the upper limit of observers that could distantly engage with SCP-3930 before all hell broke loose. And then the SCP Foundation arrived. By the time they reached the long-since-defunct research outpost, Dr. Vasilyev was the only one left. The final members of his team had sacrificed themselves by walking into the void and joining non-existence. Vasilyev himself remained for only one purpose: to tell the Foundation what he knew, what they needed to know, before bowing out into SCP-3930 himself, along with however many of the Foundation personnel needed to go to keep the number of active observers at a nice, clean 10. That is the burden of knowing, and accepting that burden is to accept that you may one day need to become unknown in order to protect your fellow human beings from the horrors that lay within. But what is SCP-3930, and what are these so-called screamers that lurk within? We have the answers to these questions. The only question for you is whether you're ready to take on the grave responsibility of knowing too. SCP-3930 does not exist. That isn't just a cover-up by the O5 Council. It doesn't not exist in the official capacity. It is, quite literally, the world's largest patch of nothingness, and anything that enters it is doomed to become nothing as well. It is a difficult concept to grasp because fundamentally, all language was built as a tool to communicate concepts that, on some level, exist, and SCP-3930 does not qualify. Close your eyes for a moment. Seriously, do it. And try to imagine nothing. What do you see? An infinite space of pure darkness? A white void stretching on into infinity? We're sorry to inform you that neither of these counts as being truly nothing. Though darkness may be the absence of light, to see that blackness is to still see something. The darkness even implies the existence of light. The same can be said for the white void. For such a thing to exist, we need both the concepts of the color white and the idea of a void. These are perhaps the lowest bars for existence imaginable, but SCP-3930 doesn't meet them. It is well and truly nothing. Nothing at all. And because it is nothing, its containment procedures are largely just a matter of information control. If nobody knows about it, the threat is contained. If ever someone just happened to wander in, they would stop existing, so the problem would take care of itself, as callous as that sounds. On its own, the anomaly would technically be harmless, but when mixed with humans, things become a whole lot more complicated. You see, unless you have the misfortune to run into SCP-3930, you will spend your life without ever having to encounter true nothingness. Even when you die, the matter that comprises your body and the energy that comprises your consciousness will remain. They will just be transferred into other forms. Humans have no reason to ever encounter nothingness, and thus we have no physiological or psychological equipment to truly observe and comprehend nothingness. When we're given a true blank, our instinct is to fill it. And that right there is the true danger of SCP-3930, and the very reason we have to deal with screamers, or as you may know them, pattern screamers. That's right. If this whole setup seemed awfully familiar to you, it's because SCP-3930 is the absolute global epicenter of pattern screamers, the hateful entities we've encountered before in anomalies like SCP-000. Nothingness is the natural environment of pattern screamers. But because SCP-3930 is the only place where true nothingness exists on our layer of reality, it's also the only place where pattern screamers are able to directly interact with humans if they become powerful and defined enough, often to deadly and terrifying results. Pattern screamers are an incredibly difficult concept to wrap your head around sometimes, but allow us to explain. Close your eyes again, and this time, picture a clown. Not a specific clown like Ronald McDonald or Pennywise. You have to make up your own clown.
Let's say he's got green hair, a big blue rubber nose, a wide smile, and polka dot clown shoes. The other details are up to you. Go as simple or as complicated as you like, as long as it's an entirely new clown you've never seen in real life. Now hold the image in your head. Really focus on it. You can even use your imagination to make him dance or walk around. Fundamentally, this clown does not exist. Aside from being the product of chemical and electrical processes in your brain, if this is indeed an entirely new clown in your mind, it exists only on the level of thought. Now imagine if this clown in your mind was somehow aware of the fact it wasn't real, and that it was only the product of your imagination. Imagine that this clown is infuriated by that fact. It despises you for bringing it into being, doomed to be a concept straddling existence and non-existence. Imagine this clown wants to hurt you. It really, 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 really wants to hurt you with every fiber of its non-existent being. That right there is a pattern screamer. And the frightening thing about SCP-3930 is that if enough people observe it directly, these pattern screamers can become real. They can crawl out of nothing, and then they can show you exactly how they feel about you bringing them into existence. And when they're done, you'll probably regret ever existing in the first place. Think of them as hostile, sentient hallucinations capable of reaching maximum power around SCP-3930. This is because when humans are given a lack of stimulus, their minds simply create their own. This is why people believe they see the forest simply continuing into the anomalous zone. It's the only way the mind can comprehend what's going on here. It's like the phenomenon of pareidolia. Humans have a natural tendency to see patterns in things, even if they were never really there. It's from these very patterns that the pattern screamers gain both their form and their name. They're monsters that we create, cursed to live hellish half-existences, and they hate us for it. Dr. Vasiliev described SCP-3930 as a kind of hateful mirror that reflects back the ugliest shards of our own minds, first broken in the futile quest to comprehend the true nature of nothingness. Thousands have likely been lost inside SCP-3930, if we can even call them lost, as lost implies that something is still out there, somewhere even if we never actually find it. This cannot be said for the victims of SCP-3930. They are nowhere and nothing. They can't be found again because there is nothing to find. The Foundation has used D-Class personnel to perform manned recon missions into SCP-3930, feeding information back to the few members of Mission Control permitted to be aware of SCP-3930's existence without immediate termination. The D-Classes have ventured well into the heart of nothingness, even reaching and entering the building that can be seen in the distance. There they found messes of haunting inconsistencies. The place looks like it's been abandoned for decades, but also has evidence of recent habitation. Doors and windows move. Curtains and hallways go on forever. They feel a sound in their ears that's similar to the screech of TV static. No, not a screech. Really more of a scream. It's always in that moment that the realization hits them. They don't exist. Not anymore. And they haven't for a little while now. They're just a few scattered memories of the Foundation researcher talking to them, reflected back by SCP-3930's hateful mirror. And moments later, they're gone, almost like they were never here at all. So if ever anyone asks you what is SCP-3930, you know there's only ever one answer. SCP-3930 does not exist.
The SCP Foundation had dealt with horrors of every kind. World-ending entities, mind-bending spatial anomalies, and objects that could rewrite the very fabric of reality. Yet nothing, not even the most malicious Keter-class SCP, could match the chaos of Dr. Gerald behind the wheel. It wasn't just bad driving. It was as if the act of Gerald operating a vehicle bent the laws of probability, physics, and good sense into pretzels. A simple bus trip meant to ferry a group of D-Class personnel between sites somehow devolved into an impromptu demolition derby, complete with a flaming pickup truck, a defeated ice cream van, and countless staff fleeing for their lives. Gerald, of course, emerged unscathed, wearing a grin that suggested he'd thoroughly enjoyed himself. Another time, a quick ride through a quiet town on a borrowed moped left half the population homeless and the other half too stunned to describe what had happened. And then there was the infamous rollerblade incident at Aurea headquarters, a disaster so thorough it entered Foundation lore as the day physics called in sick. Dr. Gerald's unique gift had earned him a reputation as both a marvel of scientific curiosity and a walking insurance nightmare. The containment staff had learned to live with the chaos, or at least survive it. Reinforced structures, evacuation protocols, and a remarkable tolerance for absurdity had become second nature when Gerald was around. Yet today, even the most seasoned researchers looked uneasy, because today, Gerald was about to test SCP-462. The object in question was a rusted 1968 Chevrolet El Camino, infamous for its unsettling teleportation abilities. Its drivers would vanish the moment they turned the ignition, only to reappear in strange locations, sometimes intact, often not. Survivors often describe their trips as confusing at best. Pairing SCP-462 with Gerald's vehicular curse was an idea so reckless, it bordered on genius or madness. The researchers weren't sure which. The El Camino sat in the middle of the reinforced testing chamber, its battered frame a stark contrast to the high-tech surroundings. Rust streaked its body like battle scars, and a persistent smell of motor oil seemed to emanate from its very essence. The key in the ignition, permanently stuck, gleamed faintly under the fluorescent lights. "Is it just me?" one researcher whispered. "Or does that car look angrier than usual?" The colleague beside them shook their head and muttered something about how ridiculous it was to assign emotions to a machine. But the first researcher didn't look convinced. Their gaze lingered on the screen, unease spreading across their face. They gestured to the observation monitor, where Gerald was strolling toward the chamber with the carefree air of a man who had never personally witnessed the carnage he caused. "He's practically an anomaly himself." Gerald entered the chamber, hands in his lab coat pockets, a smile on his face. He paused in front of SCP-462, tilting his head as if admiring a work of art. "Haven't seen one of these in years," he mused. "Classic lines, nice patina." From the observation room, the lead researcher sighed audibly. Patina, they thought bitterly. It's rust, just rust. Unbothered, Gerald ran his hand along the hood, leaving a streak in the layer of grime. "Feels solid," he said, his voice carrying through the intercom. "Now let's see what she's got." The room fell silent as Gerald opened the driver's side door. The creak of the hinges sounded unnervingly like a groan. The researchers exchanged glances. "That's normal, right?" someone asked. Nobody answered. Gerald climbed into the seat, which let out a faint wheeze as it sagged under his weight. He adjusted the rearview mirror with a casual flick, despite the fact that the chamber was empty behind him. Then he tapped the dashboard, gave the horn a light press, and nodded approvingly. "Good acoustics," he said. The researchers in the observation room held their breath. One of them mumbled something about how relaxed Gerald always looked, even in the face of certain chaos. Another, without lifting their eyes from the monitor, said quietly, "That's because he's the only one who ever survives." Gerald reached for the ignition, the key almost daring him to proceed. With the exaggerated confidence of someone about to unleash mayhem, Gerald turned the key. For a moment, nothing happened. The El Camino sat there, silent and unassuming. Then, without warning, the engine roared to life. The sound was unnatural, less car starting and more angry mechanical deity awakening from an eons-long slumber. The air in the chamber grew heavy, vibrating with an ominous hum. The fluorescent lights flickered erratically, as if the car was pulling energy directly from the facility itself. And then, the El Camino vanished. It did not fade or teleport quietly. It blinked out of existence with a deafening pop, leaving behind a rush of displaced air that sent loose papers flying across the observation room. The researchers barely had time to react before the car reappeared, suspended upside down in the corner of the chamber. Gravity caught up, and the car crashed to the floor with a resounding clang. The impact reverberated through the room, sending cracks racing across the reinforced concrete walls. The Camino idled briefly, as if considering its next move before vanishing again.
What the? Where did it go?
Someone shouted. Monitors flickered, struggling to keep up with the car's erratic teleportation. It reappeared moments later outside the chamber, perched precariously on a guardrail overlooking the facility's cafeteria. A nearby tree spontaneously combusted. Flames licked upwards as the car disappeared again, reappearing inside the chamber for a fraction of a second, before vanishing once more. Each teleportation left behind its own absurd brand of destruction. A chair in the observation room inexplicably lost one of its legs, collapsing to the floor. A crack snaked up the chamber's back wall, chunks of concrete falling in its wake. One unlucky researcher stared in horror as their clipboard disassembled itself in their hands, screws and hinges flying off as if propelled by an invisible force. The El Camino reappeared once more, this time in the chamber's center. Its tires screeched against the floor as it skidded to a stop. The reinforced walls groaned under the strain, an ominous crack that made everyone in the observation room wince. Gerald gave the dashboard a thoughtful tap. Then he looked up at the observation window, his expression alight with curiosity.
Hey!
He called, loud enough to cut through the commotion. What happens if I press the horn?
Don't!
The lead researcher started, but it was too late. Gerald pressed the horn. The sound that erupted was not a honk. It was a piercing, otherworldly wail that rattled the entire facility. Lights pulsed violently while the El Camino shuddered, glowing faintly red as though building up an impossible amount of energy. For a moment, it was suspended a few feet off the ground, spinning lazily like a bizarre mechanical top. Then, with a final screech, the car launched itself into the ceiling. Concrete cracked and splintered as debris rained down. The El Camino hung there for a moment, defying all logic before crashing back to the floor in a heap of mangled metal and smoke. The engine sputtered once, twice, and then went silent. The room was eerily quiet, save for the faint hiss of steam escaping from the wreckage. Gerald stepped out, brushing soot from his lab coat. He looked up at the observation window, flashing a thumbs up.
Smooth ride,
he said brightly.
When's the next test?
The researchers did not respond. Most were still frozen in place, staring at the wreckage with wide-eyed disbelief. A fire had broken out in one corner of the chamber, and the walls were now spiderwebbed with cracks. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm was blaring. The lead researcher pinched the bridge of their nose and sighed.
Get a containment team, they muttered, and someone lock that man out of the garage.
The mangled remains of SCP-462 were carted off in a series of reinforced crates, each one groaning under the weight of twisted metal and anomalous spite. The researchers stood in silence, watching as the wreckage was wheeled away like the aftermath of a failed magic trick. Gerald, of course, had already moved on.
Well,
he said, dusting off his hands, as though he'd just finished a casual chore.
What's next?
The lead researcher didn't look up from their clipboard. They had the tired, haunted expression of someone who had seen one too many of Gerald's successes. Next, they said flatly, we test SCP-682. The reaction from the room was immediate. Pens dropped, whispers broke out, and one junior researcher actually fainted. SCP-682 wasn't just a Keter-class anomaly. It was the stuff of Foundation nightmares. A colossal reptilian monstrosity with a burning hatred for all life and a stubborn refusal to stay dead. Pairing it with Gerald felt less like an experiment and more like a declaration of war.
Isn't the point of containment to, not make things worse?
Someone muttered. The lead researcher ignored them, flipping through a clipboard as they continued. The test will take place in Containment Area 7C. Gerald will be operating a specially designed vehicle equipped with enhanced safety measures. It wasn't clear if the safety measures were for Gerald or the research team. The testing chamber for SCP-682 resembled a work of art, or a desperate prayer, depending on who you asked. Reinforced steel walls stood over 20 feet high, each one lined with enough acid-resistant plating to survive a direct hit from an armored vehicle. Every corner was bristling with redundancies, hydraulic traps, chemical dispersal units, and automated restraints designed to respond faster than human reflexes. Yet, as the final checks were completed, nobody in the observation room seemed particularly reassured. SCP-682 was wheeled into the chamber on a reinforced transport rig. Even restrained, it exuded hostility. its massive body covered in jagged scales, twisted and flexed against the harness with a strength that made the steel groan audibly. Its claws scraped against the floor, leaving deep gouges in the reinforced surface. But it was the eyes, sharp, yellow, and burning with malice, that made the room go silent. When those eyes locked onto Gerald, SCP-682 let out a low, guttural snarl that seemed to vibrate through the walls. The sound was unlike anything the researchers had heard before. It wasn't just angry, it was personal.
Is it glaring at him?
One of the junior researchers asked, their voice trembling.
Looks that way,
someone muttered. From the observation window, Gerald seemed entirely unbothered. He stood next to his vehicle, a custom-built, reinforced monstrosity of a car that looked like it had been designed by a committee of paranoid engineers. The vehicle bristled with protective measures, from reinforced steel plating to automated acid dispersal systems. Its wheels alone looked capable of withstanding a small explosion.
Big guy, isn't he?
Gerald remarked, gesturing towards SCP-682. His voice carried through the intercom as cheerful and nonchalant as ever.
You sure this thing isn't overhyped?
SCP-682 slammed its tail against the transport rig with enough force to dent the steel. The rig shuddered, and a hydraulic hiss escaped as the containment harness strained to hold its weight. Its jaws snapped open, revealing rows of teeth that looked capable of shredding concrete, and it let out a guttural roar that echoed around the chamber.
Take that as a no,
someone whispered. The reptile's snarl grew louder, its claws raking against the floor as it strained against its restraints. Its body shifted, muscles rippling under its thick scales. For a moment, it looked like it might break free entirely. Then, with a sharp hiss of hydraulics, the transport rig released, and SCP-682 stepped forward. The room tensed. SCP-682 crouched low, its tail swaying like a pendulum. Its eyes never left Gerald, who was now climbing into his vehicle. The door slammed shut with a metallic clunk, and Gerald adjusted the mirrors with practiced ease.
Feels solid,
he said, gripping the wheel. The chamber fell silent. SCP-682's nostrils flared as it took a step closer, its claws leaving fresh gouges in the floor. The lead researcher leaned forward, their hand hovering over the emergency shutdown controls. And Gerald? He just smiled. The moment SCP-682 charged, Gerald floored the gas pedal. The custom-built vehicle roared to life, its engine growling like an apex predator answering a challenge. The reinforced tires squealed against the chamber's steel floor, leaving thick black streaks in their wake as Gerald sped directly towards the rampaging reptile. For most people, this would have been the point to reconsider their life choices. Gerald, however, was entirely in his element.
Let's see what she can do,
he muttered, twisting the wheel just as SCP-682's claws came crashing down. The car swerved with an agility that no one, not even the people who built it, thought possible. Inside the observation room, the researchers watched in a mix of horror and morbid fascination as Gerald executed another sharp turn, circling around SCP-682 like a matador taunting a bull.
Is he drifting?
Someone whispered.
He's toying with it,
another muttered, their voice thick with disbelief. SCP-682's second strike missed the vehicle by mere inches, instead gouging a trench into the chambered floor. SCP-682 clearly realized it was being mocked. It roared in frustration, its claws raking against the floor as it spun to face its infuriating opponent. It lunged again, this time hurtling its entire body toward the vehicle. Gerald hit the brakes, skidding to a halt just in time for SCP-682 to overshoot its mark. The creature crashed into the far wall with a deafening thud, sending chunks of reinforced plating clattering to the floor. The chamber seemed to take a collective breath, but it didn't last long. SCP-682 recovered almost instantly, its body twisting and growing as it adapted to the situation. New jagged spines sprouted along its back, and its claws elongated into razor-sharp talons. It let out a guttural growl that filled the room, its yellow eyes narrowing as it calculated its next move. But Gerald didn't give it the chance. He slammed on the accelerator, the vehicle surging forward like a missile. SCP-682 twisted at the last moment, its tail lashing out in a sweeping arc. The tail slammed into the side of the car with a force that could have crumpled a lesser machine, but Gerald's reinforced vehicle held firm, absorbing the blow with only a dented panel.
Not bad, Gerald remarked. She's tougher than she looks.
The lead researcher massaged their temples.
He's treating this like a test drive,
they muttered. The chaos escalated. SCP-682's next attack struck the ceiling, dislodging a section of acid containment pipes. Bright green liquid poured down, hissing as it made contact with the steel floor. The acidic fumes filled the chamber, creating a dense, noxious fog that blurred visibility. For most people, this would have been the moment to retreat. Gerald, however, seemed invigorated. "Visibility's low," he quipped through the intercom. "Good chance to test the fog lights." As Gerald swerved through the mist, SCP-682's attacks became increasingly frantic. The creature lashed out with claws and tail alike, but its movements lacked precision. In its rage, it struck everything except its target. A claw meant for Gerald's vehicle ricocheted off a nearby support beam, sending sparks flying. Another tail swipe tore through a ventilation shaft, unleashing a cascade of broken machinery. The researchers flinched as a random explosion erupted near the chamber's center. Inside the vehicle, Gerald seemed utterly unaffected. "Suspension's holding up nicely," he said, his tone almost casual. "I think I'll recommend this model." SCP-682's frustration reached a boiling point. It lunged once more, this time with enough force to shake the entire chamber. Its claws slammed into the ground where Gerald's car had been just seconds before, leaving behind a smoking crater. The vehicle darted away, tires screeching as Gerald executed yet another impossibly tight turn. "Nice try," Gerald called out, his grin audible even through the static of the intercom. "But you're gonna have to do better than that." The reptile let out a deafening roar, its spines bristling as it prepared for another attack. Around the chamber, acid continued to pool and sizzle. The room was a symphony of destruction. Metal groaned, explosions echoed, and the acrid smell of chemicals filled the air. But Gerald was having the time of his life. SCP-682 was no stranger to chaos. It thrived on destruction, adapting to every challenge the Foundation threw at it with almost smug resilience. But this was different. This wasn't just a battle. It was a circus act performed by a man who seemed more interested in testing suspension than in surviving. As Gerald executed yet another drift through a pool of acid, SCP-682 let out a guttural roar, its frustration echoing through the chamber. Its claws slammed into the floor with enough force to send cracks rippling outward, but the car was already gone, skidding to a stop on the far side of the room. "Give up, big guy?" Gerald called through the intercom, leaning back in the driver's seat like he was relaxing on a Sunday drive. SCP-682 snarled, baring its jagged teeth. For a moment, it looked ready to charge again. Then, something shifted. The fire in its yellow eyes dimmed, replaced by a look that could only be described as disdain. It straightened up, its spines bristling, and growled with what seemed like disgust. With that, SCP-682 turned and lumbered to the far corner of the chamber, its tail swaying in slow, deliberate arcs. The researchers in the observation room stared in stunned silence as the creature curled itself into a makeshift nest of debris, its massive body radiating exhaustion and contempt. Gerald popped the car door open and stepped out, brushing non-existent dust from his lab coat. He glanced at the sulking reptile and grinned. "I think we really wore it down," he said, hands on his hips. His tone was so casual, so infuriatingly chipper, that one of the researchers nearly dropped their clipboard. "Well," he said, turning to face the observation window, "I'd call that a success." The lead researcher pinched the bridge of their nose again, muttering something about hazard pay. "Get him out of there!" they barked, waving at the nearest technician. "And someone make sure SCP-462 doesn't teleport itself into the cafeteria." As Gerald strolled out of the chamber, he glanced over his shoulder at SCP-682. "Better luck next time, champ," he called. The reptile's tail twitched, but it did not move. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving the chaos and an utterly defeated SCP-682 behind. By the time the dust had settled, both figuratively and literally, Containment Chamber 7C was unrecognizable. The walls were cracked and scorched, pools of acid hissed ominously on the floor, and somewhere in the far corner SCP-682 sulked in a heap. For a creature that prided itself on its resilience and hatred of all life, it now looked uncomfortably like a toddler in timeout. The researchers gathered in the observation room, hunched over monitors displaying a laundry list of damage reports. Phrases like unquantifiable vehicular chaos and spontaneous anomaly cross-contamination peppered the document, each one more damning than the last. One junior researcher rubbed their temples as they typed, pausing occasionally to look at the wreckage and sigh. And then there was Gerald, standing in the middle of the debriefing room, coffee cup in hand. He looked like he had just come back from a leisurely lunch. His lab coat was spotless, his hair perfectly in place. The lead researcher, on the other hand, looked like they'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. "Dr. Gerald," they began, their voice tight, "do you have any idea what you've done?" Gerald took a sip of his coffee, tilted his head in mock contemplation, and shrugged. "Neutralize the big guy, for one," he said, gesturing vaguely towards SCP-682 on the monitor. The researcher let out a sharp, almost manic laugh that echoed through the room. It didn't last long. Within seconds, it crumbled into sobs, and those sobs quickly hardened into a glare sharp enough to cut steel. "You've caused incalculable damage to the facility, triggered multiple secondary anomalies, and..." They broke off, waving at the clipboard in frustration. "You activated SCP-462's wreckage. How is that even possible?" Gerald set down his coffee and folded his arms, clearly unfazed. "Okay, but hear me out," he said. "What if next time, jet skis?" The room went silent. "Jet skis," the lead researcher repeated flatly. "Think about it," Gerald said, his enthusiasm growing. He launched into an almost impassioned pitch about jet skis, calling them the pinnacle of aquatic mobility and the obvious next step in anomaly testing. "No," the researcher said, their voice brittle with exhaustion. "Absolutely not." The site didn't quite return to normal in the days following the experiment. Residual chaos seemed to linger like a bad smell, manifesting in odd and often inexplicable ways. A janitor reported seeing a mop teleport across 3 separate hallways, each time leaving puddles that defied all known cleaning protocols. A vending machine began dispensing cans of soup labeled dimensionally sourced broth, and someone swore they saw a potted plant rolling itself down the corridor like it was late for an important meeting. Meanwhile, SCP-682 remained in its containment chamber, eerily quiet. It occasionally twitched, its claws flexing against the floor, but the rage that had once defined it seemed dulled. When researchers observed it, they noticed its gaze lingering on the reinforced walls, its expression oddly contemplative. "Do you think it's recovering?" one researcher asked, watching the live feed. "Well, maybe," their colleague replied. "Or maybe it's trying to figure out how to never see Gerald again." For Gerald, though, the chaos was already a distant memory. He had moved on, literally. Somewhere in the upper levels of the facility, alarms blared faintly as Gerald glided down a hallway on rollerblades, dodging startled researchers with effortless precision. A clipboard disassembled itself in his wake, bolts and hinges scattering across the floor. "Trust me!" he called over his shoulder to a panicked junior researcher, his voice brimming with confidence. "This'll be my safest experiment yet!" The researcher opened their mouth to respond, but Gerald had already disappeared around a corner, leaving only the faint sound of wheels and the distant promise of more chaos to come.